right. Good evening, everybody. This is the regular meeting of the Hollister Planning Commission on October 23rd. The meeting is now called into order and it is 6 p.m. Staff, please call roll.
Commissioner Damian Perez,
Present.
Commissioner Julio Rodriguez,
Present.
Commissioner Peter Hernandez, Chair Steve Belong,
Present.
and just for the record, Vice Chair Carla Torres de Luna is absent tonight.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Rodriguez, do you mind leading us in the pledge?
Ready to salute? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we're going to move on to agenda item 4.1. This is the time for anybody in the audience to speak on any item not on the agenda and within the subject matter of the jurisdiction of the commission. Speaker cards are available in the lobby and are to be completed and given to staff before speaking. When the commission secretary calls your name, please come to the podium, state your name and city for the record, and speak to the commission. If you are joining us by Zoom, please click on the button of your screen to raise your hand. If you are joining us by Zoom using a cell phone, please press *9. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes with a maximum of 30 minutes per subject. Please note that state law prohibits the commission from discussing or taking action on any item on the agenda. Staff, do we have any comment cards? Yep.
Seems we have one speaker, two speakers. Okay, our first speaker is Carlos Rodriguez.
Hi, good afternoon. So I'm here because I built an outside outdoor gazebo pergola behind my house. And we're first-time home buyers here in town. We moved here 3 years ago. So when I built it, me and my dad, he was a general contractor. I wasn't aware that we had to pull a permit. So we already put some time and effort into building it. And I went to the building here next door and spoke with the planning, and then I made an appointment. I attended the appointment, and for some reason they were too busy. They couldn't see me. So they referred me to planning. I spoke with someone with planning, and they sent me back to building. So then after I spoke with them, they told me to go to the code enforcement. So I spoke with them, and it seems like they haven't really given me. They just been saying that I need to tear it down. I need to apply for a demo permit. And I was trying to talk to the planning department and say, hey, you know what? We built it up to code spec. So like the foundation of the posts, they're cemented in like 3 foot. All the materials we use would be the same materials as like building a house. The beams we put on there, we bought them from the lumber yard. So I didn't really go into detail on the materials I used, how we built it. They're just saying that I used up over 40% of the rear yard. But I was reading through the lot coverage, and it says that if there's a barbecue area, it's actually excluded from the lot coverage. It says the required rear yard area is defined as the area property between the area rear property line and the required rear yard setback line from main building. So I spoke with someone at the planning, actually code enforcement with Matt, and he told me I had to be 10 feet away from the house. So my yard from the house to the back property line is 15 feet wide. So he's saying I have to be 10 feet out from the house and then 3 feet out from the property line. So that would leave me with only like 2 feet. So I told him, I was like, I don't think that's the right setback for my yard because my yard is only 15 feet wide. Now, I spoke with somebody that they're kind of like with the builder, and they're saying that I only have to be 5 feet away from the house. So my pergola is actually 6 inches away from the house. There's nothing connected to the house, which I explained to them. And today I spoke with somebody with code enforcement. His name was Matt, and he was saying that maybe, most likely what's going to happen is, they want me to tear it down, apply for a demolition permit, which the permit fine, I guess, is 950. It doubled for some reason. And then I got a second notice in the mail, which the fine went up to $500. So I kind of explained to the other person in code. So anyways, my question was, is there any way I could schedule or see if I could get a permit since it's already built and, and besides tearing the whole thing out? Or, I've been trying to speak with different departments and it seems like they haven't really given me an answer yet. So my question would be, is there any way I could schedule like an inspection? They could come and see what I built and they could say, hey, you built it way too big, or you need to fix this or that. Or, I just don't have, I ask questions, but I don't get answers. So, I'm just trying, and I told him it was a sacrifice on building it. Labor and materials are expensive nowadays. And if I would have to spend the $950 on the demo permit, redo the whole thing, it wouldn't be in my budget. So I told him, I was like, with the holidays coming and Thanksgiving around the corner, it's kind of tough to spend another expense on something that's built already. So my question was, is there any way I could just see if I could schedule an inspection and they say, hey, you built it up to code specs, the setbacks are right, and just apply for a permit, but they're just not giving me that option. So I'm just here today to see what I could do, or, what's the next step.
So unfortunately, the commission can't discuss anything because it's not on our agenda. Staff, is there any direction that you can give them?
Only that it would really depend on the case. So you can reach out to us. I can give you my card. I think I have one in my bag. If you stick around for a few minutes, I'll find a time to grab you one. But yeah, it sounds like it depends on if it was code enforcement or staff or demo and the setbacks and everything. It'll be specific to the case.
All right, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I think if it's possible, maybe because this whole conversation that's coming up next is going to be about the process, maybe there could be an opportunity at the end of the meeting to come up with a remedy, or at least consider a remedy and be able to talk to the applicant.
Well, the item before you later on the agenda is a presentation, and it doesn't specifically agendize his particular project, so I wouldn't recommend discussing it outside of, because it isn't on the agenda specific.
I understand. My main point is
His project is largely outside the purview of the planning commission as well.
But we're definitely overseeing the process, right? And there's a process, and from what we're hearing, he doesn't understand the process, or there's been a lot of ambiguity, which actually is consistent with the other meetings, that there's an issue with the process. So to a certain extent, maybe not his specific project, but at least as far as addressing potential issues, we're not going to understand how to address those as planning commissioners if we don't understand what was the failure in that engagement.
Sure, he's certainly welcome to listen to the presentation so that he understands the process as well.
Our next speaker is Samantha and Ruben Lopez.
Hi, I'm Samantha, and this is our second time here before the Planning Commission. We were here in June, I believe, on the same matter. One of our neighbors in the Mirabella tract where we're from, community, was just having issues with the city, the engineering, applying for permits, getting the runaround, getting told one thing and another thing. So a lot of back and forth, and we explained that at the last meeting as well. And we're kind of here in the same situation. We don't know what our next steps are. We've done what we're reading up on. We get a citation, we do the administrative hearing. My neighbor who was just here as well, his plan for his fence extension got approved because of all the stuff going on. There was miscommunication and whatnot. So our question last time was, well, what do we do? And they're like, well, his case is different. It got approved. You have to go back and follow your steps and then come before the planning commission. So we didn't know how to do that. We did our administrative hearing. We went to the city to file an encroachment permit after the fact. They told us you can't do that. You have one permit. You're only allowed one permit. I told my husband he should have asked, like, well, am I not allowed to rescind a permit or take it back? Like, I paid for it. If I just chose not to do that again and I wanted to do something else, can I apply? They just told him no, no, no. So right now we're just like, okay, so what do we do? Our fence is out. We have a citation. We just want to find a remedy. And this goes back again, which we'll talk about later, what the processes are and if they could be a little bit more clear in assisting anyone who does want to come and do things correctly and file permits, get a clear understanding of what the next steps are, or get our questions answered instead of getting the runaround. So,
I just wanted to add that we did apply for the encroachment permit, at which the engineering department would not even take a look at it. They just said, we're not accepting that. You already have one on file. So we don't even have the opportunity to appeal it because he will not accept the request.
so we're stuck.
And our citation's already at $1,000. So it's our third notice already. So,
Yeah.
and we haven't got no answers. They just want us to tear it down and then come and apply for it. And maybe they'll grant it and then build it back out. So it's,
Yeah, and then I'd like a little understanding, which I don't know who I would talk to. So about the PUEs, I know I brought that up in my administrative hearing was the public utilities, if they're not being used, well, isn't there a way to vacate them or to purchase them or to do something? They told me to call the public utilities department. I called them and they said, well, that's going to be your city. They're the ones that handle the utilities. And I'm like, you're sending me right back to the same place that sent me back to you. So I'd like to know more about that too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one question, either for the, do we have code enforcement hearings? I know when I was on code enforcement for City of Santa Cruz or for the county, they would actually have hearings. Do we have that in the city of Hollister? Where they, is anyone, city attorney or?
My understanding is that there are code enforcement hearings, but I'm not a part of the code enforcement department, so I'm not familiar with their process in depth, but my understanding is that there's hearings.
Okay, I'm just curious if we have something like that. I do know, not to detract, that a lot of things could be resolved at those hearings that aren't necessarily it's not really purview of the planning commission, correct? It's kind of more would be a code enforcement issue and they could have a hearing.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I think technically every individual has a right to remedy, right? It's so it's a constitutional right to be able to have and I would assume that there's an arbitration process afforded to the public. So yeah, I mean, personally, I think that would be a good education, right? I mean, that's what the whole point of the next item is.
Okay, staff, are there any other speaker cards via Zoom or?
We do not have any more speaker cards.
Okay.
Nobody online either.
Okay, so we'll move on to item number 5.
Oh, my apologies. We do have somebody online.
Rob Collins.
Rod Collins is online.
Go ahead and unmute.
Hear me now?
You have 3 minutes.
Okay, yeah, I wanted to speak on number 7 of the agenda, and I didn't know if I needed to raise my hand now or later.
No, you'll raise your hand later. There'll be an opportunity on number 7 as well. This is for items not on the agenda right now.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so if there is no more speaking cards or speakers for non-agenda items, we will move on to item number 5, consent items. And that'll be approval for August 28th meeting and approval for September 25th meeting. Do we have any questions from the commission on items on the consent agenda? Or are there any items that the commission would like to pull for further discussion? Hearing none, staff, do we have any public comments on items from the consent agenda?
We do not have any comments.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries 4-0. And we will move on to item number 6.1. Staff, may we have the report?
Can you please pull up the presentation?
Good evening.
Sorry, Rosette. Brendan, can you share the screen on the Zoom as well? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Rosa Lopez, and I am the assistant planner with the City of Hollister. Item 6.1, it is a site and architectural review 2025-4. It is a freestanding monument sign at 494 Tres Pinos Road, which is the Chase Bank. The project proposes the removal and replacement of a freestanding monument sign located at the Chase Bank, which is in the General Commercial Zoning District. And the green arrow shows the existing and proposed monument sign. The existing monument sign is located in the landscaped area near the bank. And the proposed monument sign is a double face, 25 square feet, 12 feet tall. And it meets the size requirements of the zoning code. And as you can see, it is smaller than the existing sign. You have several options on this project before you tonight. You can adopt resolution approving SNA 2025-4, subject to the findings and conditions of approval contained in the draft resolution. You can adopt resolution approving SNA 2025-4 with findings or conditions modified by the Planning Commission. You can deny SNA 2025-4, or you can continue the hearing and direct staff to provide additional information or clarification. Staff recommends you select option 1, which is to adopt a resolution approving SNA 2025-4. And
Thank
that
you.
concludes my presentation. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the commission? Hearing none, I will open up the public hearing at 6:19. Staff, do we have a presentation from the applicant on this item?
We do not have a presentation.
Do we have any public comments on this item?
We do not have any public comments.
Okay, so I will close the public hearing at 6:19. And is there further discussion from the commission on this item? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to adopt resolution 6.1 site architectural review for the removal and replacement of the freestanding monument sign at 494 Tres Pinos Road for Chase Bank.
All right, there's a motion on the floor.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Hearing none opposed, 4-0, the motion carries.
Thank you. And I'm just going to note for the record that that will be Planning Commission Resolution number 2025-9.
Okay, moving on to item 7.1. Maybe we have a staff report.
Camera on the dais today. Good evening, Planning Commission. Eva Kelly, I'm your planning manager. Tonight, I'm going to go over the planning processes in the city of Hollister, both staff level and Planning Commission, council level, and do some brief background as requested by the Planning Commission at one of your earlier meetings. So just the overview of my presentation tonight, I'm going to start with some legislative framework, both local and relevant state laws to how planning works in the city of Hollister, and then go over our process for entitlement applications, so planning entitlement applications, and then I'll briefly discuss appeals processes, post-entitlement processes, and then go over the various types of applications that we have, ministerial, some preliminary review information, and then our large development applications and entitlements. Beginning with the legislative framework, the big key piece of local legislation that guides all of our policies and goals in the city is our general plan. Every city and jurisdiction, every city, county in the state of California is required to have a general plan. And this is a long-range document that is the blueprint for all of your growth and development in your city. And our general plan is currently the 2005 to 2023 general plan, though we are in the process of updating that through the year 2040. And general plan is establishing our community's vision, and it has a series of supporting goals, policies, and actions over all of the framework of the city. So general plans are required to have what's called elements, which are essentially chapters, but you can kind of put them together or separate them and order them how you like for your city, but they are required to address certain elements. These are land use and community design, circulation, so our traffic and pedestrian circulation, housing, which I'll talk a little bit more in depth about, natural resources and conservation, and open space and agriculture. So those are our required elements. And health and safety, which includes noise. But I will note that the city of Hollister's current general plan also includes additional elements. So we also have a community services and facilities element in our current general plan. So that talks about our utilities and our public services, our wastewater treatment plant, so other community services. So we have an additional chapter in our general plan. And in the 2040 general plan update, the city's also proposing to add 3 new elements. So all of these 7 are community services and facilities element, but also we're adding an arts and cultural element, an economic development element, and an environmental justice element into the 2040 general plan update. I did want to talk a little bit more in depth to the Planning Commission about the housing element, as one of the big types of projects that you will see and review are housing development projects. The housing element is a little bit different than the rest of the chapters of your general plan. It is required by state mandate to be updated on a more regular basis. So while our general plan hasn't been updated since 2005, and it's not required to be updated, they're usually updated every 15, 20 years. The housing element is required by state law to be updated every 8 years on an 8-year cycle. Our 5th cycle housing element was adopted in 2016, and it covered the 2015 to 2023 5th cycle. The 6th cycle, which is what we are currently in the process of updating, is for 2023 to 2031. So we are in the middle of that. We do not currently have what's called a certified housing element. So we're working to update that so that we can have a certified housing element in the city of Hollister. The housing element, one thing that you've probably heard of, and if you haven't heard of it, you'll hear it tonight, and then you'll probably hear of it again in the future, is what's called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, which is RHNA, RHNA. And this is a designation by the state for the number of housing units and the affordability level of those housing units that every agency in the city of Hollister has to plan for. So the city's been assigned that number by the state. The Department of Housing and Community Development reviews and approves our housing element. And so we have to plan for our current six-cycle RHNA, which is 4,163 units. And it's important to note that what this means is we have to plan for it. We have to have policies that allow the housing to be built. We don't have to build the housing. The city doesn't build housing, and housing gets built by the economy, right? Landowners, developers, they're the ones that are building the housing, but we have to accommodate them to be able to build 4,163 units if the housing units want to be built.
And that's in the city, right?
That's the city of Hollister
That's
specific
not the
RHNA.
whole county.
Correct, the whole county. So our region is includes San Benito County, the city of Hollister, and the city of San Juan Bautista. So we're a small region. And that number is 5,005 units. So the city has 4,163 units of the overall 5,005 housing units for the region.
I just have one question.
Yeah, of course.
I know we have time at the end, but so when a municipality adopts a housing element, so whether it be the county, whether it be the city, that's not automatically them approving 4,000 homes. Because I've heard that being said, that the Board of Supervisors approve their housing element. That's not them arbitrarily just approving 4,000 homes.
That's correct. That's exactly correct. So we adopt the housing element, which means that we adopt, we find enough what's called sites, candidate sites. So vacant or sometimes non-vacant land that could be redeveloped into housing. And we make sure that it has enough zoning, density wise to accommodate housing. And the housing element specifically will say, we think that this site, let's say it's an acre site that we have, could be built at 15 units an acre. So we think that this site could have 15 units on it. And we specifically say we think that the sites could be built here, but it's also, so it's about land use designation, but it's also about policies. So it's also about facilitating easier processes, easier zoning ordinances that might be restrictive, talking about policies to potentially look at fees or, reducing fees for affordable housing, those types of things. So it's a combination of both policy and land use designation to combine into a way that you're proving to the state that you could accommodate these 4,163 housing units to be built.
Okay, awesome.
The other local framework that's important is our municipal code. So the city's municipal code, it has 17 chapters, but what's important for the Planning Commission and the things that you'll see is really our Title 17 zoning and Title 16 subdivisions. But the municipal code is the specific implementation of our general plan policies, and it guides how the city operates through all functions, including, our finance department and business license issuances and code enforcement and fire and police and the service of utilities and those types of things. But for the Planning Commission, our big focus in the planning department is Title 17 zoning, which is implementing the policies, specifically our land use policies mostly, and some circulation policies of the general plan into the details for how we regulate land use in the city. And the goals of the zoning ordinance, of the general plan, of everything that we do in planning and building and in the citywide is to promote and protect the health, safety, convenience, and the welfare of our community, right? As we build, as we correct, unsafe structures through building permits and those types of things, that's the goal in mind. And then Title 16 subdivisions is also something the Planning Commission will see applications through, because subdivisions are all of your tentative maps and tentative parcel maps, anything to do with the subdivision of property or the merger of property and creating and eliminating existing parcels. So Title 16 subdivisions largely implements state law, which is the Subdivision Map Act. So we have these two titles in our municipal code that are big guiders for how we do process and how applications are reviewed against. Additionally, and I will talk about most of these further into the presentation as they come up into process, but these are some main state laws that have to do with land use and land use process specifically. So I'll talk a little bit more in detail about the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. I'll talk about some completeness determination processes and decision timelines that come into our application review process from state law mandated timeframes for review. And then I'll talk about the Housing Accountability Act. Again, there's a lot of laws and legislature about housing and how to expedite housing processes in the state. And so we implement that through our reviews and our procedures here at planning staff level, commission level, and council level. And then I wanted to talk to you about two specific types of applications that come through the legislature. So SB 330 preliminary applications we'll talk about, and SB 35 ministerial applications I'll talk about with the commission. This one doesn't really fit into process, but so I start with this law, just a detail on this law, the Housing Accountability Act, which is HAA. It is Government Code Section 65589.5. And the main thing for the Planning Commission to know and understand is that the state has determined that housing is an emergency in the state. We need to facilitate housing production. And essentially, the Housing Accountability Act says that you cannot deny an affordable housing project unless you make very specific findings. And this is a high standard of proof. If an agency wants to deny a housing project, you have to make these findings and prove it to why you're denying a housing project. There are about 6 findings, but the real one that is important to the commission that isn't a very niche situation is that the housing element needs to have a specific adverse impact to public health or safety in order to be denied.
Quick question.
Yeah.
What is there legal definitions to what that findings is, or is it just, is that the actual language in the law?
That's the actual language in the law. And it does go on to say that a housing project that doesn't meet your code or doesn't meet your general plan is not a specific adverse impact. So it is a high standard. We would definitely.
Has that been challenged? When did that law pass?
Jennifer, do you recall when it passed? I want to say 2018.
Yeah, the Housing Accountability Act's been around for a long time, but this portion is probably at least that old, since 2018. I don't know the exact year.
And not that I would want to challenge affordable houses. Obviously, we need them. But it just brings the question for me, because I know that technically there was the Chevron versus EPA case that actually like sets specific requirements for legislators to actually apply strict scrutiny to their legislation, not allow ambiguity. Because technically, if you're violating the general plan, which is supposed to address, health and safety, public safety, there's all these things that are necessary, or even just adverse impacts, right? Like, not enough schools next to it or whatever, and then all of a sudden you have, or the density of the population. There's a lot of houses. I mean, a lot of cars. There could be a lot of adverse impacts, but how do you define what adverse impacts are?
That's the question. Yeah, I don't have a great answer for you. It's a difficult standard to prove on the city that it does have a specific adverse impact to health or safety. I will say it's not that you can't enforce your general plan, you can't enforce your zoning code, but there are things, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about was the builder's remedy, which you've probably heard of. There are codes, or, we've talked a little bit about density bonus law, where you can get concessions from certain zone aspects of zoning or something like that, where, the density bonus, for example, if a project wants to and they meet certain affordability levels, they could get a bonus to density, so they could build above the highest level. So I think that's mostly where it's going with it doesn't meet your code or strict application of your code or general plan. where some of those things, like that's not a specific health impact. If someone's
Well-
qualifying for a density, oh, go ahead, Jennifer.
Sorry, the Housing Accountability Act does actually identify what specific adverse impact means, and I just wanted to pull it up and read it to you.
Yeah.
So a specific adverse impact means a significant, quantifiable, direct, and unavoidable impact based on objective, identified written public health or safety standards, policies, or conditions that exist on the date the development application is deemed complete. So basically, it's looking for you to tie those specific adverse impacts to a measurable, unavoidable impact that's already established in the city's standards, policies, or conditions, or perhaps state standards, policies, or conditions. So that might still sound a little ambiguous, but I think it makes it clear that it has to be something that's known, measurable, and unavoidable. So hopefully that helps and doesn't make it more confusing.
So Jennifer, it
Yeah.
sounds like, in other words, the burden of proof would be on the municipality. In other words, we would have to prove that this is adversely impacting the community in a negative way. I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but I'll just be very blunt here. I think we all know the traffic situation in this county or in this city is just horrible. Could that, in the future, could that constitute a adverse impact, or could we make the argument?
Well,
And-
and it doesn't say, it's an adverse public health and safety impact. So you have to tie it also to public health and safety. And I will say there was a comment about, or a question whether or not this has been litigated. And yes, it has many times. So we could always look to guidance from case law about, what did the court determine in a particular set of facts. So maybe there was a case related to traffic that we could look at, or different cases that relate to different sorts of circumstances.
And not to belabor the point here, but obviously, we'll have to later down the road, but I mean, I'm just thinking out loud here, even class action lawsuit, because this is not an isolated incident where I think, we have 60% of the community commuting out. And I know we're not the only municipality who's facing those challenges. I'm just,
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's and I'll move on from it, but the reason why I mentioned cars, you're seeing, because of the affordability crisis, ultimately people can't, now you're seeing 2 to 3 families in one home. At a certain point, I mean, you can't stop people from living together, obviously, but then at a certain point, I would imagine there's an increased risk of public health and safety because there's so much of a push for impact, ultimately increasing, trying to force housing when we're not addressing our current infrastructure issues. So, but as it relates to affordable housing, it doesn't matter because I guess, it would probably pass strict scrutiny anyways.
Yeah, I think it's really about, like Jennifer mentioned, and as she read from the law, it's about having a specific policy that we have in place, about, I'm thinking just in like quantifiable things or public health related, you could potentially like a GHG emissions. I think you're probably looking at something that's like in a CEQA document where it has an unavoidable impact, it can't be mitigated. I think that would be one of the only ways that you'd be getting into this, but it would be very specific, and staff and our attorneys would obviously work with you on any sort of project that was even going remotely down this road. Yeah, so I wanted to make you aware of that finding for denial of affordable housing projects, but I did also want to make you aware of builder's remedy, which I'm sure you've heard, floating around the community, this kind of buzzword comes about. But what builder's remedy is it's a path to approval of a project for an affordable housing project that meets certain requirements when a city does not have a certified housing element, which we do not. The project does need to have at least 20% of it being affordable to low income, or there's a caveat for 100% affordable moderate income project, but they do have to meet those first requirements of affordability overall in order to even start down this road. But what this means is that a project might be approved even if they don't meet many of our local zoning standards or requirements. but we may still be able to apply certain objective, quantifiable standards that are in place. CEQA, or environmental, which I'll talk about again further into the process, but CEQA remains applicable. It's not an automatic exemption from environmental review if a project is builder's remedy application. And I will note that there were some major modifications that came into effect under builder's remedy law on January 1st of this year. So if you ever hear anyone talking about builder's remedy 1.0 versus builder's remedy 2.0, the new law that's been in place since this year is builder's remedy 2.0, and it was kind of a cleanup bill. So it really clarified a lot of confusion that happened with the first one about what objective standards can be applied and how to apply them, and what the review procedures are for builder's remedy projects. So I did want to go over that, and that comes again from the Housing Accountability Act as well.
I just also wanted, I think I just looked up right now, I think 40% of California municipalities do not have certified housing elements.
I don't know the number. So
Okay.
if you looked it up, but I don't know the number.
Okay, I just wanted to
It's-
throw that out there. I know we have people in the audience, when we hear we're not in compliance, it's kind of a scary word. I do know that a lot of municipalities are struggling to be in compliance.
Yeah, it's definitely dwindling down. We're into the last, few dozen, if any, that are not in compliance, but we are working on that. And one of the things about compliance is you are subject to these builder's remedy projects, but you're also potentially subject to pretty significant fines and possibly litigation from the state. And we're pretty much not qualified for a lot of grants funding that's available because we don't have a certified housing element. A lot of the state grants that are available, even outside of planning, but your transit projects, ATP, active transportation planning, that's the grants. A lot of those sustainable communities grants, those have a certified housing element requirement. So it's something that the city really wants to do, and we are in the process of doing that, moving that along. Okay, so that's my kind of summary of legislation and local laws that are kind of guiding the reviews and the frameworks that we're reviewing projects against. So the next part of my presentation, I want to talk about our local review process. We do have flowcharts, and all of our flowcharts that are available. We have some flowcharts for our major projects, our CEQA appeals, minor projects, ADUs, accessory dwelling units specifically, but this is what they look like. This is our development application process flowchart that's available online. And I attached everything else as an attachment, so it's easy to pull up in your agenda packet as well. But we're going to walk through this in my next slides. So we start with a project submittal, and then we assign a planner out to that project. And then we get into what's called the completeness determination. I mentioned this in the state laws, but the completeness process comes from state law. And what happens is upon submittal of a development application for an entitlement to the planning division, the city has 30 days to review the application for completeness. And what completeness means is that they have every item required on their plan set and in their application. So we know a title report and those types of things that are required submittal items from our available submittal checklist that's online. So this includes every single detail that's needed in a planning application plan set, dependent on your project. So it includes, your access or parcel number needs to be on a title page. You need to have a north arrow. You need to have existing floor plans, proposed floor plans. All those things are detailed in our submittal checklist. And the city has 30 days maximum to review this and provide an exhaustive list of anything that's missing. And if we don't include an item, we can't then ask for it later. So we have to go through very detailed in those 30 days to make sure that we have enough information in the application in order to process the application and review it against our codes. So if anything is missing, we write up what's called the notice of incomplete application, and we send that back. Then the applicant, when they resubmit to us, we go through that same 30-day thorough review process to make sure that they've provided those missing items. When it's complete, when they don't have any missing items, then it's deemed complete for processing, and that's like an official term. And it goes into design review. So we have all the information that's necessary to review your application properly against our codes and our local requirements. I will say that we do route our projects to our development review committee, which I'll talk about on the next slide, and try to provide design comments about the project as well as completeness comments to try to, we don't want to say, oh, you're missing all these things, provide us that information. And then, we say, okay, you gave us everything you need. And then in the design review portion, then we come back and give them kind of, this doesn't work at all, redesign it. That's the official process, but we do try to get, those comments about, hey, you're not meeting your parking requirement, you're going to need more parking, into those initial completeness letters as well. So we separate completeness from comments, but we do try to provide as comprehensive of a comment letter on applications as we can during the completeness process. So once a project is officially complete, two different things happen simultaneously. The first is environmental review, subject to CEQA. So this is our CEQA process flow chart, again, that we have online. But what happens is that the project is either determined to be exempt. So there's a series of about 35 categorical exemptions that are outlined in CEQA law. A big one is infill development. So if it's less than 5 acres and surrounded by urban areas, it can probably be deemed exempt, and then your environmental review is done. If, however, there is a potential for an environmental impact, it goes into preparing an environmental document pursuant to CEQA. There are two different types. There are negative declarations, which can also be mitigated negative declarations, and then there are environmental impact reports, or EIRs. If after you do an initial study of the project and determine that, there could have been an impact, but we're able to mitigate it with a mitigation measure. So for example, a common mitigation measure that we have is there could be an impact to unknown cultural resources when they start digging in the ground. So the mitigation is that they'll monitor their digging and make sure that if something is found, we call, a cultural resources person or a tribal resources person. Therefore, it's mitigated. It's not going to be an impact to cultural resources. Then we adopt what's called a mitigated negative declaration. And we determine that with the mitigation in the document, it's not going to have a significant impact on the environment. Otherwise, if you're reviewing and it's determined that the project potentially is going to have a significant impact on the environment. So let's say greenhouse gas emissions. It's producing a lot of vehicle trips, and we had to do an analysis of greenhouse gas emissions, and it was determined to be over the threshold, and even with mitigation, it's still going to have a potentially significant impact. We prepare a more comprehensive environmental document called an EIR, and then that is what the environmental review consists of. It says, if we approve this project, it could have an environmental impact, but we make certain findings that we'd like to approve the project anyway. It's important to note CEQA environmental review is informational. If a project has a significant impact, that doesn't mean you can't approve the project. It's a notification document to the public. It says, hey, there's a project proposed, and we took a look at its potential impacts to the environment, and we made these determinations, and we tried to mitigate them to the best of our ability or completely. And it's informational. It says this project, we've been thoughtful in our review. It does not mean that you can't approve a project if it meets the city's requirements and the city wants to approve a project, even if it has a potential impact. So simultaneously with environmental review, a lot of our projects are going to be deemed exempt, but sometimes they have to go through a preparation of a document. We also are doing design review on that project plan set. So we have determined that we have all the information that we need in order to properly review this project. So we route the project to our development review committee, which we call our DRC. This is an generally internal reviewing body, but it does include some of our partner agencies, particularly where they're relevant to the review of the project. But this is our planning team, our building team, engineering, police, fire, our airport, if it's near our airport, Public Works Department, our Parks and Recreation Department, if it involves a park or dedication of a park, Recology, our trash collection provider. So we route the plans project application to our DRC so that the members of the DRC can provide us their specific comments. You know, planning, we're looking at our zoning and compliance, but our fire department is looking at the fire code. Our building department is looking at the building code. Our engineering department is looking at street networks and improvements to frontage, you know, sidewalks and utility lines. Our public works department is looking at improvements to, you know, sewer or parks and recreation. Like I said, looking at any proposed park designs, those types of things. So all of the development review committee from across the city provides planning their comments. And we're kind of planning is kind of the consolidator of comments, the facilitator of getting an entitlement approved. But as you'll see, as you see more projects come before you, most of the conditions and things that are coming onto these projects are coming from engineering requirements, building code requirements, fire code requirements. So we kind of compile them for entitlement approval.
Would this also be like the health department too for like a
Yeah,
permit?
yeah.
Okay.
We have, you know, San Benito County Environmental Health is involved in a lot of our projects, especially use permits around like restaurants and those types of things.
So the county's also somewhat,
Yeah.
or certain county,
Mhm.
now my question to you is, are all these different agencies, are they all in one centralized location, or are they all spread out throughout the county?
Without different departments.
Yeah, they're all our different departments. So we route electronically our plans to everyone, and we typically give, so like I said, we include the DRC in that 30-day completeness review and trying to get these important comments back to the applicant alongside any missing information. So in those 30 days, the first day or two is gathering and putting everything together, putting our file together. We route to the DRC and we typically give a 2-week review period so that if they need a little bit longer, there's a little bit of flexibility before the planning division needs to compile all those comments back together and make sure we meet that 30-day deadline. Because that 30-day deadline, if we miss it, the project is automatically deemed complete. We can't ask them for any more information.
And you said this is electronically, so I'm assuming when it wasn't electronic, it was all by mail, correct? In the past.
Yeah, in the past, they used to prepare like 15 sets of plans and applications, and they would go deliver them to everybody. You know, they'd go drop them off to the fire chief, and they go drop them off to the police chief,
Okay.
because we're all over the place, right? So, and we'd say, here's your plan set, review it, get us your
Right.
comments back.
I think the reason why I bring that up is because there seems to be a lot of different agencies. I guess it is electronically, but it almost seems like it would be advantageous, like other communities, other countries who have all their government municipal agencies in one centralized location. And obviously that's just very vision. That's just me speaking out, you know. But in your professional opinion, do you think it does convolute the planning process when all these agencies are kind of spread out through the county?
I mean, I don't think it does. I mean, I think we're in an electronic world.
Okay.
And when we need to, and I'm trying to work on kind of getting us back to a place where we could have a more regular DRC meeting get together for some of our larger projects. It's in the works. We used to meet, but it was really, it was somewhat unproductive because we weren't getting the kind of written feedback that we need. The applicants really need the written feedback to come back so they can review it and address it and respond. But we're working on that. But getting everybody into a room or having everyone together doesn't really help because they really need to review it with their kind of specific expertise in mind, right? You know,
Have applicants had grievances with it? Like, in other words, maybe they show up to the engineering department and it's the wrong department. They got to go to a different department across town. Like have you had situations like that?
I mean, yes, but I will say that this is specifically the planning division's process,
Okay.
right? So I think it's important, and you know, we have people in the audience here too for the public and for the commission. The planning division is really your kind of first step, and I want to do a project or I want to have a new use or something like that in the city, and we as a department, as a division, planning, what we do is we really are that kind of consolidation of everybody's comments. And then what happens, and we'll get into it when I get into the post entitlement process, but we don't really issue permits per se. What we issue is entitlements. So an entitlement, I think the best way that I think of it is a planning entitlement is permission to get a permit. So we take the bigger picture, the whole thing, you know, let's say we're looking at an apartment project, right? We look at the circulation plan and the road network, and they need sidewalks on the outside, and they need ADA parking spaces in their parking lot, and they need to have a certain design this way, and they need to dedicate a little bit of a public park, right? And we look at it as a whole concept. And so that what engineering can do when they review it is say, okay, in order to build out the sidewalk, you're going to need a permit you're going to need this permit to build sidewalk. And then you're going to need a grading permit when you start digging the dirt. You're going to need to come to us and get a grading permit. And then building department says, okay, once you've graded and gotten your engineering permit, you come to the building department and you're going to get a building permit for this building, and you're going to get a building permit for the pool house that you want next to your pool. And so building is issuing permits and engineering is issuing permits. And then our fire department says, you're going to need a fire sprinkler permit in that building, right? And so then later when they're ready, they get a permit from the fire department for a fire sprinkler. So we're the first step at the planning department here at the planning commission, the council, when we approve an entitlement that says, okay, here's all the things you need to do after. And those are your conditions of approval, right? So we're not issuing permits as planning necessarily. There's a few exceptions, minor things, but we're issuing permission to get your concept, or the concept, the plan, and then everybody tells you how do you do that after, right?
If
that
you're
makes
gonna
sense.
address this question that I have, feel free to just let me know that it's gonna be answered later in the presentation. But it seems like the process is well established once it begins. But from prior cases and some of the things we heard tonight, there's a lot of questions before they even begin the process or the application. So my question is, if it's something about a fence, a business application, or a big housing application, is it all the same process?
Not necessarily. So for planning, anything, and it may be a little biased, but I always recommend coming to the planning department first, because if it does require planning, we're first, right? If it does require planning, if it does require the planning commission to consider that project, we're the first step in any of that process. Now, not everything requires planning approval. There are some minor things, you know, our engineering department reviews moving your fences around. That doesn't have to do with the planning department. And it's in our zoning ordinance, but it kind of just says you can build this kind of fence unless you want to get an exception, then you need to go to engineering and get a permit, right? But mostly everything for building permits, you probably need planning approval first. You know, if you're putting up a sign on your building, you're going to need a planning to make sure the sign meets the ordinance first.
But it seems that they have multiple options. An applicant go to the city planning, they go to another department. So it's not required for them to go to your department first, right? They could, it's recommended, like you said, depending on the project, but it's not like a clear guidance as to like.
Yeah, so we've been working a lot, and I've been working as I've been in the planning manager position on trying to improve our processes and also to kind of get that consolidation between our different divisions. One thing that we recently implemented, I don't remember if it was the beginning of this year or maybe about a year ago now, but we've been trying to work with our finance department who issues business licenses to new businesses to have a kind of a halt, like, hey, we see you want to start a new business, go talk to the planning department to make sure it's allowed. So that's now in place to try and help funnel and facilitate, because before there was a lot of disconnect. I won't say there's not still disconnect across other divisions, but that's one example of things we've been working towards. And so now we have just a free minor application that for new businesses who are either getting a new business license, changing their address location, or if you're doing tenant improvements, if you're doing any construction modifications to your business, we halt at the business license and send you to planning to say, what are you doing and where are you doing it, so that we can see if our zoning code allows it. But also it gives us an opportunity to say, yes, a restaurant is allowed here in the downtown. That's an allowed use, but are you doing any improvements to the building? Okay, then you have a process. You have a site and architectural review or a construction process. And we've also consolidated our community development permit center counter into one counter, so that it doesn't combine engineering, it doesn't combine finances, but amongst the community development department, we have one consolidated counter where we can help you with planning, building, housing, and cannabis affairs. So when you're coming to the planning counter, you're also coming to the building counter, you're also coming to the cannabis affairs counter. So they can help you facilitate that as well. And when you come with a zoning application for verifying a new business, for example, they can tell you if you might need a building permit for something that you're proposing. They can also tell you might need a planning permit for something that you're proposing. So we are trying to consolidate and funnel and have that interagency collaboration to try and help people out. But for the commission and for people who are asking you, for the public, I'd say my recommendation would be planning is always a good start, because we can at least tell you, hey, restaurants aren't allowed in a residential zoning district. You're going to want to look elsewhere. Don't buy that property. Don't lease that property, because what you want to do, our zoning code doesn't allow it, or it does. Here's the first step. Did that answer your question?
Yes, and I imagine it's hard to get everyone to be able to answer all those questions equally, because I imagine there's specialization within the teams.
Yeah.
So if depends on who's covering that day, you may get it the same answer as somebody else, or you think it really depends on individuals? Because again, it's a lot of different type of projects. So.
Yeah, I mean, right now we've been training our technicians on mostly planning and building, but we have, we are in communication, phone call away, a little chat message away for our planners. So our technicians have access. They are primarily building techs, so they know all the building knowledge, and then we've been training them, and we have a planner of the day. So my planners are on a rotation to be the direct support of the counter. If they need more help from a planner, more specifics, they can call the planner of the day, and that's the person who can come give them more expertise. So there's a chain and ability to facilitate communication from the planning and building counter, but it doesn't include all our permits, right? Our code enforcement department is a different department doing code enforcement things with a code enforcement counter. We have an engineering department that's a different department doing engineering things, engineering permits with a different counter. Finance department, same thing. Fire department, same thing. So in the city, we're working on better facilitation, but some of that unfortunately comes from being in different areas, different buildings, physically apart, different department heads. So, there's only so much you can do when you're not the same department. But community development, we're really trying to work on being that home base, being a good place to come, and trying to get that interdepartment kind of transfer and understanding of the knowledge and understanding of the process.
So what is the typical education level, or what of a planner? Like what do they cover as far as their understanding in this process?
I'm not sure I understand.
So is it like, is it like their education's on understanding municipal code as it applies to a general plan process? Or do they have engineering backgrounds? You know what I mean? Like, because I guess I'm trying to visualize a little bit when an applicant comes, what they can expect as far as how they're going to get guidance into addressing their project.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that the key thing is going to be trying to understand what their project is, right? A lot of times people don't necessarily know what their project is, or we might get, someone who was cited by code enforcement, but they don't yet have their code enforcement citation. So it's difficult for us, what's going on? We weren't out there, we didn't cite you, right? So it's going to be kind of trying to figure out what it is that's going on. Are you trying to do something new? Are you trying to fix something that is already there? Are you trying to do an upgrade? Are you trying to start from scratch? Or is it a minor project? So our techs are going to try and walk through and try and understand where you're at. Do you have an existing permit that we're talking about? Something that is being revised, or you're trying to submit for a new permit? Are you under construction and then you had an inspection and you didn't pass the inspection. So I think there's a lot of nuance to what's going on at the counter that makes it kind of difficult to.
And that's, and I guess that's the point of my question, because I'll give you a simple example. Code enforcement should be pretty obvious, right? They're applying the municipal code process, right? So if it's a violation, there should be something in the code that's specific to them, right? Because then when they write their citation, they're putting the code on there that they violated. So that's a little bit more narrow of a scope, but from what it sounds like, a planner is kind of the, like,
Do
I
the
don't know.
parents have access to
Does
that
everything.
system, to those citations?
No,
No, right, it's totally separate.
no,
right?
we don't have access to
Yeah,
it. They
so-
have to send it to us.
And part of my reasoning for mentioning that is because there seems to be kind of this like collision happening between two departments, because I've heard in many cases, the code enforcement is citing them for something that the planner said it was okay. You know, I had one instance that, specifically the mayor had mentioned, she'd forwarded to me, and it was basically a person who had to get an exemption for putting some kind of a storage unit on their property, because they had to basically, they're renovating their house. And long and short, I think through that process, the code enforcement, because it'd been sitting there for a while, came inside and said, you don't have the right to put this thing here. And then sure enough, then I'm finding, you know, from what I'm being told, they were actually approved with that. That's why they were approved, because, and I think they had some kind of an exemption because of the actual location of their property doesn't have access to be able to store the storage unit like on a side yard, or I don't know, somewhere a little bit more hidden. And the neighbors, I guess, and I know that here's the other element, which is, it is the reality. A lot of our enforcements, as far as nuisance goes, are very ambiguous. And it's not obviously code enforcement's fault per se, but technically they have to respond to any kind of a nuisance, right? So if someone says, hey, that person's living in that storage unit, I know he is, I mean, technically code enforcement has to go out there and inspect. And I guess in this instance, they did inspect, and it's like, no, he's not. This is where I'm keeping my tools. I have no other place to put all these big powered tools to do this renovation. But it doesn't matter because they basically had to address that issue. And I guess they ended up getting cited for it, even though they were told it was okay. That's why they even had that unit there in the first place.
Yeah, and unfortunately, code enforcement is their own ballgame and their own department,
So who runs and operates
the police
code,
department.
so Hall Street Police Department?
Yeah.
Who operates the planning department, Greenleaf, correct?
Not the
Or is it
the
internal?
community development department.
It's community
And the
development.
planning manager.
Your planning manager, okay. So as of right now, is there any policy or anything in place where, say, someone does challenge something, or it's kind of like in this limbo, right? Where, oh, well, he said, she said, kind of, is there any policy or any kind of daily communication with code enforcement? Or is it, like you said, it sounds like there's no policy in place, correct?
I mean, there's the municipal code, but yeah, we're not involved in code enforcement citation.
Okay.
We get a lot of people sent to us to try and get permits for things that it's like, sometimes they can get a permit, sometimes they can't, sometimes there's a process, sometimes there isn't, and we try to help when people come to us, but
So
we are involved
my
in the
question is, so if,
citation, we are not involved in the citation process, we are not involved in the fee process, we are not involved in the remedy process for fining or appealing your administrative citation. That is code enforcement's process.
okay, so if they're in the process of fixing something, getting a permit, correct? Like, because it sounds like we've dealt with that before. Just because they're in the process does not mean they're not going to get cited, correct?
Correct. If you do something that is not permitted by the code, or you do not have a permit for something that could be permitted by the code, you could potentially be subject to code compliance.
Okay.
But that's the purview of the code enforcement department on who they cite, when they cite, if they're getting called out. We're pretty reactive to calls. It's not,
Okay.
we're not driving around, but planning, building, engineering, we're processing entitlements or permits. But we're not citing you
Okay.
if you don't have one.
So I guess I've worked in code enforcement very briefly, but I enough to see what works, you know. County of Santa Cruz, their whole entire planning department was upstairs. That's kind of why I was getting at earlier with just, it was upstairs in one room. code enforcement. I was a tech. There were times where during the administrative hearing, if someone wanted to appeal a code complaint or something like that, we had the code compliance officer, you know, the main person, and we had planning. So-and-so would say, oh, well, they're making an effort, a concerted effort to remedy these problems. They're going through the planning process. So then you have the code compliance officer who would say, okay, I'm going to monitor it. And then it turns into monitoring the process, right? The code compliance officer was monitoring the process. So we didn't have to take it all the way to start fining people. I understand that it's two different departments.
I mean, I guess I could say that they do monitor and reach out. It's the amount of code cases that are not being fined, that are in various processes of non-corrective, is far outweighs those that are not in any process. But from a like who gets cited, unfortunately, that's not up to the
Right.
planning department. It's not up to the community development.
So it sounds like we'd have to have a whole nother meeting with the code enforcement. Would you guys be willing to work with them? The point I'm trying to bring up is you have people who are trying to make, you know, an effort to remedy these things, right? Well, you know, code compliance is just going to say you need to just tear it all down. Well, we've had the same exact issues in Santa Cruz County where the deck, you know, you had the code compliance officer, you had the building inspector. He's like, you know what, I'm going to go out there. We're just to see where it is, make these changes. So that way there was a process. It wasn't just like tear it all down just because, you know, they're the authority. And I get it, they have the policing powers to do that. What I'm trying to articulate is there's a more efficient way to kind of get everybody, you know, in the same room. And I'm not trying to like, you know, our job is to come up with solutions. And I've worked in a
I
county.
will say that that's not actually the planning commission's job, with all due respect. Your job is to review entitlement applications against the municipal code. But I will say that we do work with the code enforcement department to resolve their cases when they come up and have to do with a planning permit or a building permit application in the community development department. I am certain that they work with fire and engineering and other departments to process their permits in the same way.
Would you say it's a checks and balances model where there's a code, they enforce it,
Correct.
and then it's all processed, clarified? So if an applicant is working through something, are they provided anything that they could show an officer showing up? Is there anything that they would take as, okay, I'll come back?
Like a permit? Like if they
Something
had
that
a
they're in the
permit for something?
process that excuses whatever observation they're having that day at the property?
So if someone has we'll get emails from code, you know, they'll be checking up on, let's say they give an applicant 30 days to, let's say, get a demo permit or go get a building permit for something to try and get permission. They'll check in and say, hey, it's my deadline to check in with my code case. Do you have a permit? Have they come in? Have they come by? We have a spreadsheet like where we work collaboratively, but, you know, saying, hey, we talked to this person or they came in, those types of things. So that is going on. But from a perspective of, you know, the planning department, the planning process, it retroactively trying to permit something that was done without permit,
Right.
incredibly much more complicated than permitting something from the ground up.
Are the deadlines and I guess I can't ask this question correctly, is the deadlines that they're giving, say the code enforcement, are they realistic deadlines? Or you're looking at like, have you seen something that's like, there's no way we're going to get this done in 30 days?
I will say that they give deadlines and then the deadlines are extended and extended and extended and extended. The code enforcement department is incredibly lenient on deadlines on fines.
They're lenient. Okay.
Yeah. Like if people are coming in, if people are trying, if people are talking to them, they're gonna give you extensions. They're gonna
Okay.
work with you.
One related question, sort of, for projects that have density bonuses, like
Yes.
they have small backyards, for example,
Mhm.
how are the codes enforced? Like if they only have 10 feet from your back of the house to the back fence and you want to do a project and then there's an ordinance or something that says this is a specific setback, like how is that enforced? Is it just whatever that reads, or they're like,
Yes.
do those projects
So
consider specific review?
So the code is the code, is unfortunately the answer. And some of the code sections are not as logical as others. As the commission's aware, we're working on code updates, process updates in our code, general plan amendments to try and improve some of our regulations that are outdated. But I will also say that many of our subdivisions, especially the ones that you've seen come in the last 10 years, are under what's called a planned unit development, which we have updated in 2023. We updated that process because it was really being used in like not a correct way. It was being approved with a conditional use permit, but a lot of our new subdivisions have incredibly tight setbacks where they were approved when the entitlement was approved. So when the subdivision map and the conditional use permit for the plan development was approved initially at the planning commission level, at the council level, when those entitlements were issued, they were given exceptions to the standard setbacks. And then developers built at those setbacks. So for example, our standard R1 low density backyard setback is 20 feet or 20% of the lot. A lot of our new subdivisions got exceptions to that through that plan development process, which we've updated. So now it's a full rezoning process. It's more proper. But in the past, it was a conditional use permit. And so they got, you know, instead of 5-foot side yard setbacks, they have 4-foot side yard setbacks. Instead of 20-foot backyards, they have 15 or 10-foot backyards. But they don't, and then those houses are built right to those setbacks. So they have small backyards, but they don't have an exception to other sections of the code. It was, you know, smaller lots, trying to facilitate housing development as it was designed. But they don't have any sort of exception to anything that wasn't outlined in their approval. So we have to apply the code equally across everyone, even if they have a different base setback if their house is built, just as if a standard single family was built at that 20-foot and then they needed to build something, you know, they would be subject to the same. They just happen to have a slightly larger backyard in that case. So
the reason I bring it up is just for consideration. Like we're able to provide flexibility for certain projects for many reasons, right? Because what they're providing, it might be to provide more affordable housing. But I'm wondering if it's a project with an exception on it, knowing that they have less to work with. I'm wondering if there could be extra consideration in considering those setbacks in those properties, right? I know you said a code is what it is, but I'm just wondering, like, you're facilitating being flexible with developers. I'm wondering that with homeowners, that could be an option for them as well, especially if they're in one of those communities. Again, no answer. I'm just
yeah. So we would have to update the code to accommodate something like that, right? To where there's flexibility built into the code, then there can be flexibility and built into enforcement, right?
So, and so if you can give a rough estimate, how far behind are we with making the code jive? To, you know, because I know you mentioned earlier that technically the way you done it proper is you did it consistent with the zoning, right? So that way it's already set up with the zoning, and then at that point, once people apply, then the code was already consistent with that zoning, right?
Yes. So I don't know that I have a timeline because it's not, there are some sections of our code that are actually outdated because state law has changed, but other sections are outdated just in that they just don't work that well for modern things. It's not that they're wrong. It's not that they don't meet state law. They're just our local policies that need updates. So there's not really an outdated in an outdated sense of the term. You know, they are fine and valid. They just don't work that well. So we're trying to update them. But from specifically talking about that plan development process, what we've done is turn it into a real, what most agencies do, which is a rezoning. And essentially we give that project, if it's going through that plan development process, its own zoning code that talks to all of these details and only falls back to the code where it's silent, but we can talk to all of these things. We could talk to accessory structures. We could talk to these things so that future homeowners, renters, whatever it might be, commercial development in a plan development can speak to their specific plan development code. That is our current ordinance. That's one of the things.
Is that what you call the plan development standards, I believe, right? You have to set up standards to meet?
Yeah, you set up a plan development. So instead of them following our strict code as it's written with our zoning that exists now, our standard R1 with its, you know, lot size and setbacks and accessory structure design and front yards and backyards and driveway cuts and those types of things, you can set up a planned development where maybe there's courtyard style homes and consolidated parking or something like that, where, you know, it's something we didn't think of when we were designing our specific code. Even when we update our code and update our standards and think it's a lot better, there still might be some creative project that comes through that the city wants to approve, but it just doesn't meet our code. And so they can get an approval, and that's a legislative decision, you know, it'd have to go to the council, but they could get approval essentially to have their own standards. That's a process that's in place now.
I don't envy you because I know there's a lot of moving parts. But it sounds like, you know, and that, I would imagine that's the goal of this presentation, is to understand how to help creating more consistency with the process. I mean, to a certain extent, even though we don't have authority over the code enforcement, that doesn't mean we can't make recommendations to try to encourage that more continuity, obviously, on that policy level with the
Absolutely.
city
Yeah.
council.
Yeah. So while the commission doesn't have, you know, direct ability to influence like the process or some of the things that we'll talk about, excuse me, like ministerial applications and those types of things where it needs to be approved by staff, or it's just a matter of reviewing it against the code, the commission's real power in the legislation is as a quasi-judicial body. You do get to approve things, you do get to review and actually make decisions on projects and see if they meet the codes in some cases, but you also get to make recommendations on codes to the commission or to the council, excuse me. So you can say, hey, council, you know, and a lot of these will come through from staff. If we're recommending a code ordinance change, we'll bring it to you first. And you guys get to have feedback, and you're the planning kind of quasi-legislative experts, right? Who are in this day to day, whereas the council's in all of the other things. You're in the zoning ordinance day to day, right? And so you get to make recommendations on updates to the zoning ordinance, updates to the subdivision ordinance. If someone's proposing a rezoning to a planned development with different standards, you get to make a recommendation to the council. Yeah, we think this is a good project, or no, we don't think you should approve this project. That's your power in the standards and policies, is to recommend those policies to the council so that they can input them into the code, so that then staff and you guys can enforce them on projects.
I appreciate your response and just giving us guidance on what recommendation could be made. But I'm just identifying the root cause of all this, right? It's just the tighter setbacks, special projects, and then like we found the one development, a lot of citations that were not even the homeowners' actions, it was how they received them. So I just feel like it's good to track that whenever something is adjusted or an exception is made. Maybe do what you said, like, all right, how would somebody be able to live here and take advantage of their property, right?
So that sounds like even a part of the review process, to
Yeah.
make amendments to that review process to create more clarity on the front end, or, you know, whatever recommendations you might have.
Yeah, we're really trying to work on, you know, improving every day as we're getting projects in, really trying to be thorough. And I know that it might, you know, it's not always planning complaint, right? Oh, my building permit, my code enforcement, we get jumbled. And so I understand that. But when we're talking about planning and, you know, things taking time or those types of things, as I've discussed already, right? Planning is that first step, the setting the stage, the figuring out the process, figuring out how this is going to come to fruition once we decide that we want the project to happen. And so the city's really trying to be thoughtful and detailed, thinking about these things, thinking about the future, thinking about how we can make these things happen. So putting a little bit more effort into that front end, thinking about our conditions, putting that effort in to try and make the process in the future smoother. And then also, these are, you know, planning, what we approve here in planning at the Planning Commission, planning staff, is the things that get built in our city. It is the new commercial developments. It is the new housing developments. It is new use permits for new businesses, right? These are things that become a part of our community. So we want to be thoughtful. We want to protect the health and the well-being and the convenience and the welfare of our community. That is our charge here at planning, is to think thoughtfully about these projects so that when they come to fruition, we've had all of these discussions. Going back to design review, I would just say that, so planning we route to our DRC these plans to try and get those comments from everybody. And then we serve as kind of the compiler, the point of contact, and we send those comments out. And then applicants, revise their plans, resubmit, respond to the comments. And then once all the comments are done, then we can bring it forward or we can make a decision, right? Sometimes the decision-making body is staff or the director. Sometimes it's the planning commission. Sometimes it's the council. But once we've addressed all the comments, the goal is always as staff to try and have a project that we can recommend approval on to director, or a project we can approve or recommend approval to the commission or the council, right? So we're trying to say, hey, this section doesn't meet the code, make a tweak so that it meets the code. Once they've made that adjustment to the comments, then we can come forward and bring it forward for recommendation of approval.
Quick question, are
Yeah.
planners in-house?
Yes. So we've got a complete application. We've addressed all the design comments. Now we go to a decision on the entitlement, right? Approval or denial. So staff level decisions, we prepare what we call an action notice for most things, which is essentially similar to your resolutions. It's saying this is what's being approved and these are the conditions that you have to follow. You need to get a building permit, or you need to get a permit from engineering, or you're good to go, make sure you talk to fire, whatever the conditions might be. And then it can be approved by staff. I'll talk about the different types of permits that fall into these categories after this. Then we have planning commission decisions, which are the ones that are important to you guys. What we have to do to bring an item forward. We had an item tonight for that sign that you heard, the site and architectural review application. We have to make sure that it's properly public noticed. So anything that has to do with the use of real property, that's kind of how it's outlined in the law. So that means building a new structure, changing land use, changing the zoning designation, anything that has to do with the use of real property has to be noticed in a newspaper, and it has to be noticed to all of the property owners within 300 feet of the subject parcel or parcels. So there's a timeline for that. It's a 10-day public notice typically. So we have to get things into the newspaper. There's some lead time on that. We send out those 300-foot notices, and that's how something can come before you at a public hearing. We then prepare a staff report. We prepare a resolution of approval or denial with a recommendation with findings based on our expert opinions from the DRC, and we bring that forward to you in our reports to the commission. And then we have what we had tonight for the previous item. We have a public hearing where the applicant can speak, any member of the public can speak. It was noticed to the newspaper, it was noticed to the neighbors, try and get the word out about what the public hearing is about and that there's going to be a decision. And then if it's a planning commission level decision, the planning commission can approve or deny the project. For city council decisions, it's pretty much the same thing, except for because it has to do with a use of land in the city of Hollister, the planning commission, you are their recommendation body. So it's first going to go through those same steps, but instead of making a decision at the planning commission meeting, you're going to adopt a recommendation and make a recommendation to council. And then staff will do the same thing. We have to notice it again for a public hearing at the city council level. We'll prepare another staff report for the council. It's typically about the same staff report, but we incorporate the planning commission's recommendations into those staff reports for the council. Then the council will hold a public hearing, and then the council will make a decision. And I've noted, just for your information, if the decision is about adopting an ordinance, so changing the municipal code, then that requires 2 readings of the council before it's actually adopted. And then in the city of Hollister, most entitlements, like I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, planning is issuing entitlements. So we're issuing permission to get permits, right? So most of our entitlements have a 2-year approval period. There are opportunities for extension, but essentially it says, okay, yes, we want to see this project happen. We want to see this land use come to fruition. You have 2 years to go get your engineering permit and your building permit and build it and all these kinds of things, right? There's lots of steps, approving it at planning doesn't a building be constructed make, right? It takes time. So most of our entitlements that we approve in planning have a 2-year approval period.
So really quick on that. So technically speaking, if you're given an entitlement, that means that they have the right to start the process. But technically speaking, it's all supposed to jive with, with the permitting, right? To make sure that they're following the code and everything. And that's where I guess I probably didn't understand from the beginning, but technically, from my understanding, entitlement is a legal protection that the applicant has, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what it means is you have an entitlement, let's say it's for 2 years. Again, most of our things are for 2 years. And that means that you have a right to this project as it was designed. Even if the city goes and changes the code a little bit later, you get to build this project as it was approved. But if that expired, let's say they didn't build the project in 2 years or, and then it expired, they could propose a new project, but new codes might apply. So when the planning department or the planning commission or the city council gives a planning entitlement to a project for a site and architectural review, for the design of a new building or a subdivision, that means that they have 2 years where even if code changes, law changes, you can't go in and say, oh, we approved this new lot that's 50 feet wide, but then the city decided to change the code and say that the minimum is 70 feet wide. So now you can't have your map anymore. That entitlement's approved. New projects are subject to new codes. But there is a process, there's the technical engineering review of those improvement plans. There's the review of the map and making sure that all the little details that aren't necessarily on the planning plans are all kosher and comply with our engineering standards. That takes time. So you give them time. You give them 2 years to get all that nitty gritty technical work done so that they can record their map or that they can build their building, get their building permits.
And that's, I'm assuming, kind of why the city and the county ran into some trouble, a few years back when people, they're building all these new homes because those entitlements were given 10, 15, 30, I don't know how many years, but
Yeah.
and that's why it's best to put a shelf life on these entitlements, 5 years, 2 years, like you were kind of.
That would be a planning or a council decision.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 2 years, some things come from our code, some things come from state law. There are discretionary extension options where, we could say yes or no. There are some things that, they automatically extend the entitlement. So the state often will come through and say, oh, housing developments, anything that was approved between this time and this time, if it was still active between this time and this time, they get a year. They get a year and a half. And then, so this 2 years, take it with a grain of salt. A lot of times there's automatic extensions. There's extensions after the fact. So you could see projects, having had a really long lifetime, but the city's initial is pretty much never longer than 2 years and sometimes it's shorter than 2 years. For decision timelines. So again, going from our complete application to a decision by whichever body it is, if it's staff or the commission or the council, there are some government codes that regulate how long you can take. So I just wanted to cover these really briefly. They're a little bit technical, the longer codes, but this first section is about how long an agency has from the decision that you made about CEQA. So when you certify or adopt an environmental document for the project, if it's an environmental impact report, if you certify the environmental impact report, then you only have 180 days to make a decision. For a negative declaration or a mitigated negative declaration, it's 60 days. It's also 60 days from a determination of exemption. I will say that for most cases, the commission or staff or the council are going to be making a decision on the environmental document at the same time as you're making a decision on the project. But it is important to note that there is technically a timeline. If you adopt an environmental document and then, you want to talk about the project more, make changes to the project, there is some time frames that we need to keep in mind and that staff is thinking about if those things come up. Another thing just about housing projects is Government Code Section 65905.5, which was adopted a few years ago, that says that you can't have more than 5 hearings on a housing project before you make a decision. So you just want to keep that in mind if we're having a study session or if it's a housing project that also needs to go to the council. When we give you that option, continue for more information. We want to be mindful, especially on housing projects, that we're not continuing and continuing and continuing and continuing. We've never had that problem here in my tenure with the city of Hollister.
That's state laws.
State law. Yeah.
5 times.
5 hearings on a housing project before you make a decision. Yeah. So we don't run into that, clarification, and then we bring it back, and then staff tries our best to answer the questions that the commission might have so that we can make decisions on these projects. But these laws come from other agencies where, you know, they don't want to decide, they don't want to approve it, but they don't want to deny it, and it continues and continues, and then the state imposes laws on us all. So now we've had a decision, your project's approved, or your project was denied. The city has a 15-day appeal period. So from a decision that's appealable, a decision of staff that's discretionary can be appealed to the planning commission. Decision of the planning commission can be appealed to the council, and the council's decision are final. So it's a 15 calendar day appeal period. So if someone wanted to appeal something that the planning commission decided, they would have 15 days to file an appeal with the city clerk for city council. And then it would go to the council where their appeal could be heard through the same kind of review process and decision process of we review, you know, the terms of the appeal, and then we'll prepare a staff report and have a public hearing on the appeal. And then the council will either decide to uphold the appeal and uphold the decision, or overturn the decision or modify the decision. So
Is there a timeline once it's appealed?
there isn't one. It's something that we would want to implement in our code updates, but right now the code doesn't have a time frame between, you know, when they apply and when they don't. From staff's perspective, it's typically like the next month or the month after, depending on noticing timeframes. But we have had cases where applicants or appellants who appeal say, I don't want to go yet. I don't want to go yet. I don't want to go yet. So we kind of go whenever they want to go forward with the hearing, because we don't have a time frame in our code.
So explain that again. It says interpretations believed to be in error. Oh.
Yes, so this comes from our code. So these are the staff level discretionary decisions that could be appealed to the planning commission. So if staff made an interpretation of the code, you know, the staff interprets the code to mean this and made a decision approving your project, denying your project, and they believe that to be an error, that the code should approve their project, that can be appealed to the planning commission, where the planning commission can make a decision on that interpretation. Determinations of incompleteness. So if it's in the law for incompleteness, but it's also in our code. If you are incomplete, so we do a 30-day review, you're incomplete, you resubmit, and then you're still incomplete, you can appeal that second notice of incompleteness to the commission, and the commission can decide if it's missing the item or not. That doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. And then enforcement actions is outlined in our code.
So if an applicant wants to appeal, do they ask for an appeal application from you and then they turn it in somewhere?
Yeah. Yeah, so if they were appealing a staff decision to the planning commission, they would file the appeal application with the planning department at our permit center counter, pay the fee, and then we would process it through. Or if they're appealing a planning commission decision, it technically gets filed with the city clerk because it's a council. And then the city clerk goes, we got an appeal, and passes it over to us, and we process it. I believe the council's adopted fee for an appeal is about $3,000, $4,000.
$30,000?
No, 3 or 4. I can't remember.
For an appeal?
Yeah.
And that includes everything, or?
Yes, so that,
Like
yes,
a pergola,
yes.
$3,000?
They don't have, the council doesn't have like a tiered appeal or anything like that. They just adopted a flat appeal to the planning commission, appeal to the council. So the post entitlement processes, I'm gonna these are gonna be very high level reviews, because this is kind of, you've done your planning thing, right? And that's planning manager, it's planning department, it's planning commission. We got you a planning entitlement. That's kind of where we pass it off to our colleagues, right? To get them through their technical processes and their permit processes. But planning stays involved on projects that we have entitlements on, because we monitor the conditions of approval and make sure that, you know, we're meeting all the right steps and everything that everybody put on and the commission put approval steps on. But post entitlement, for anything that has to do with, you know, moving dirt, grading land, building infrastructure like new pipes, new water sewer lines, new sidewalks, undergrounding utilities, anything like that. The first step in your post-entitlement process is to go to our engineering department, and you're going to go through civil review. So the civil engineers are going to be reviewing your improvement plans and or your grading plans for improvements and grading. They're looking at all the technical aspects of your sewer line and your slopes and all these things that are too technical for the details of our planning phase, but they review all the technical aspects for those improvement plans and issue approvals on those plan sets. And then for subdivision maps, so the planning commission might approve a tentative map or a tentative parcel map for a subdivision of land. The engineering department reviews the final map, and the final map is what actually gets recorded by at the San Benito County Recorder. And when you record a final map, that means that's the legal process by which a property gets subdivided. So engineering, your civil review process, is for reviewing all of those types of plans and types of documents after you got planning entitlement approval to do that project. Engineering also, just for information, they also assign addresses. So anytime that a project, whether it came from planning commission or might be something minor, like a building permit or anything like that, if we have anything that needs a new address or a re-addressing of a multi-tenant building or something like that, engineering approves addressing. They have a little application for that where they assign new addresses in the city. And engineering also issues encroachment permits in the city. So a big project might have a big encroachment permit, but also, our PG&E, anytime anybody's doing work within the public right of way, so that's sidewalk to the road for the most part. Anytime anybody's doing work in the public right of way, you need an encroachment permit from the engineering department. They're going to make sure that traffic circulation is going to be okay. They're going to make sure that the work that you're doing is, not going to mess up our utilities, not going to mess up our sidewalk. You're going to put everything back the way that it needs to be. That's our engineering department. That's our civil review process. The other post-entitlement process, that's kind of the big one, is your building permits, right? And you're going to need a building permit anytime a project is proposing new construction of any sort of structure, modification to a structure that's existing. You're going to need a building permit, right? And so building permit review process in the most high level way is that they also have a state mandated completeness review process. So they have submittal checklists of all the different types of applications and what you need to show on your plan sets. So they go through a completeness review process, and then they go through a plan check process. So that's kind of the DRC, right? But it's specifically our building permit plan checkers who are reviewing the technical aspects against the building code. Like engineering reviews the technical aspects against the city's standards and specifications. Plan check is reviewing against building code. So they're checking electrical wiring and all of these things, right, on the plans. And then you get your building permit issued. There also, when you apply for a building permit, you pay a deposit for plan check. Once it's ready to be issued, so the plans are approved, that's when you pay your building permit fee. So you come pay your fee and you pick up your permit, then you're ready for construction process, depending on your project, but every construction process is going to have at least one, more likely a series of inspections. So you're going to call, you're going to put up your framing for your house, and then you're going to call the building department, schedule an inspection. They're going to come out, look at the framing. Then you're going to put in the electrical, and then you're going to call the building department. An inspector is going to come out. They're going to look at the electrical. So you're going to go through a series of inspections on your building permit all the way up until you're ready to be done. And then you're going to apply for, it's not a new permit. You just ask, like, I want to get final occupancy. I want to get my final inspection. And final occupancy is, you'll hear a certificate of occupancy. And so this is granted by the building official. And it says, this building is ready to be occupied. It's ready to be occupied by a person living in it, or it's ready to be occupied by the new business that's going into this commercial space, or, but it'll have a use on the plans. Maybe it's storage, maybe it's a house, maybe it's a restaurant, maybe it's retail. That's in your building permit plan set. And then at your very final inspection, the building official, so it'll go through everybody will sign off on it. All the DRC, everybody who had conditions, airport planning takes a look and says, yep, they did everything they need to do. Engineering says, yep, they did everything they need to do. Building goes, I've done all my inspections. Goes through a check-off list of everybody, with the last sign-off being the building official, and they grant that new structure occupancy. I kind of mentioned it, but a building can't get final occupancy until the project can't be fully completed until all of the conditions approval from way back, maybe 2 years ago. The planning commission gave you a series of conditions of approval that says, you got to do this and you got to do this and you got to do this and you got to do this. And once all of those are done, which they go through the process, right? Like some of all those conditions are already done once you've done your civil review. They were all about putting certain things on your civil plans and making sure you get engineering to sign off on your final map. So that's all done, right? Before they got their building permit. But once all the conditions are done, that's how you finish a project, right? And then you get final occupancy and your new building's good to go.
Are there construction inspections held within your department? Like all those records?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the inspections are going to be done by the building division of community development. So my department, not my division technically, but.
Is it within your purview to suggest inspection checklist items? The reason I asked is because we had an incident where there was a fence built into the PUE by the developer and it wasn't caught at the time of occupancy and so forth. So I'm just wondering if you could advise on that, if that's totally separate department.
Yeah, so fences are not, the building department's not looking at fences, but they weren't. We're being better about it now, but those houses were built different times, right? But a fence doesn't need a permit unless it needs that exception permit from engineering, right? So fences are a little bit weird in that you can build a fence. You can build a 6-foot tall fence outside of the PUE, outside of the 10-foot corner lot setback. You can build a fence, a 6-foot fence with a 2-foot lattice. You are within your right to build that fence. You don't need a permit from planning. You don't need a permit from engineering. You don't need a permit from building. You can build that fence. It's when code enforcement goes out and they say, oh, that fence isn't. That's the, right? So it's the exception that needs the permit in the particular case of fences.
That fence isn't what? It's not in the, like, I don't know, I guess if you could finish that sentence, because I'm trying to follow your train of thought. You're saying that technically you don't need a permit, but then code enforcement goes out and it triggers something.
Oh, yeah. So the code about fences is, if you can build a fence, if you're an interior lot, so you got a house on all sides of you, right? You share your exact property lines with your neighbors. You can build a fence on your property line that's 6 feet tall with an 8-foot lattice. You can't go into your front yard, but if it's not in your front yard, you can build that fence. You don't need to come to building. You don't need to come to planning. Likely your original developer built that fence for you, but you can build that fence. You can add the 2-foot lattice on the top of your 6-foot fence. You're good to go. And then on a corner lot, which is where we see a lot of our citations, is corner lots, right? There's a 10-foot setback. That's in the code. So developers, they're typically building them at that 10-foot setback. A lot of times that 10-foot setback also aligns with the public utilities easement. Sometimes developers have a 5 or 6-foot public utilities easement and they got the engineering exception to put it in that 10-foot setback originally when they built the house. Sometimes they didn't. And so what code enforcement might be seeing if they go out and they cite a fence is a fence that isn't meeting the normal standard. So they're seeing something that's closer than 10 feet. They're seeing something in a front yard. They're seeing something taller than 6 feet with a 2-foot lattice. So they're seeing a fence built outside of the standard, even though that standard fence doesn't need a permit. Something outside of the standard fence needs a permit. If that makes sense.
So it's only when, again, totally separate. They don't have access to your records. They don't know who was granted an exception. So again, it's just, they're driving a lot of traffic your way. So I'm just wondering, like, what are some opportunities to mitigate that?
Yeah, it's a,
Ongoing.
yeah. It's one though, we just kind of have to work through it on a case by case basis on the fence thing. Because you don't really, I don't know that I'd come to you with a code that recommends getting a permit for a fence that meets our requirements. Most places have codes similar to ours. They might have different setbacks. They might have different heights. They might have different requirements, But most cases, most cities, most jurisdictions, when it comes to fences in particular, in your zoning ordinance, they say, this is where and how tall fences are allowed. And they don't make you get a permit for them. They say it's just the exception, it's the variance, it's the I don't want to follow the standard code for my fence. That's where the permit process comes in for exceptions. Typically with fences, you're not typically wanting to regulate, you know, somebody wants to paint their fence white and black and brown and change out the gate, and permitting fences would be unnecessarily burdensome, I think, on homeowners.
So what does resolution look like for like citations for somebody who might have been caught in between different messaging from a developer or the previous homeowner? They took action, did something that they weren't supposed to, like just because they were built without a permit and that specific fence type required a permit, because again, it wasn't following the code. Is it automatic denial, or do you take the chance to review it?
The engineering department, and I won't fully speak for them, but they're gonna review it, but there's not really flexibility in that
And
code,
they're
right?
referencing the code.
Right, staff's job is to enforce the code, interpret the code, review the code, review things against the code, right? We're not the council, we don't have the legislative authority to give exceptions unless the code lets us give an exception. So in the particular case of fences, that code, that table is pretty explicitly clear. It says engineering can give this exception and they can give this exception, which is your front yard fence can be 3 feet tall, no permit. If you want to go up to 4 feet, that's the maximum engineering can approve is 4 feet. So 3.5, 3.25, 3 3/4, 4 feet in your front yard, engineering can give you permission to go above 3. That's one of the exceptions. And then the other one is if it's in your 10-foot side yard setback, the engineering department can make a determination of whether it meets health and safety. And engineering has, outside of the zoning ordinance section, they have their standards and specifications that say fences can't be in PUEs. So typically they'll approve an exception. Like I said, a lot of our subdivisions got approval at the original building permit stage for an exception in that 10-foot to go to like 6 feet or to go to 5 feet, because that fence is still outside the public utility easement. It's just closer than 10. So a lot of our fences already have the exception. But to get a further exception or to do something else is engineering's pretty restricted on what they can do. Okay. That is pretty much all I have on a process, right? So we talked about the legislation that's kind of governing how we make the decisions that we make. Then we talked about the process by which we review those things to implement that legislation against the project. This last section that I have for you is just kind of our most common, most typical. It's pretty much all of our applications that we have, that we process in the planning department. So not in building, not in engineering, not fire. You know, I kind of talked through their process, but these are planning applications that you can apply for with the planning department. So ministerial applications are staff level approvals that don't have any discretion. You're just talking about, our job is to look at your plan set, look at your application, look at our code, look at our requirements, and say, are you meeting it? Yes. Are you meeting it? No. If you're not meeting it, no, we'll write you up a letter that says this is what you're not meeting, what you would need to change to get approval. So ministerial applications are approved by staff and they're reviewed for compliance with objective standards, right? Fences can be 6 feet tall with a 2-foot lattice. If your fence is 6 feet tall with a 2-foot lattice or less than that, good to go. That's not an application, but that's my example. No applications for fences. And the ministerial applications also include most all of our post-entitlement applications. So civil review, building permit issuance, when engineering is reviewing a final map for approval, they're looking at it against the code and against the approved entitlement, right? The entitlement that the planning commission gave might have been discretionary. We took discretion on where we thought it met the code and didn't, and you know, if there's flexibility in the approval process. But when engineering's reviewing the actual permit for that map, the actual permit for those improvements, they're just, doesn't meet our standards, doesn't meet what was approved, doesn't meet the conditions, right? So that's that ministerial, there's no discretion. They're not saying, oh, maybe, maybe not, right? Building permit issuance, same thing. Is it meeting our building code? Is it meeting the conditions of the approved project? So the planning department, we have accessory dwelling units, so ADUs and junior ADUs. That's a ministerial application through planning to get an entitlement to build an ADU on your property. I'm not going to go over the ADU process, but we do have an ADU process specific flowchart that was attached and is on our website.
I think I brought this up before. I think it was brought up last year too. I think, have we looked into getting the pre-approved ADUs from the county? If that's like a copy and paste thing we could do, because I know that the county has offered that, or not offered that, but I know that there was discussion of that.
Yeah, so I was in communication and tried asking that to them. It's kind of a matter of plan ownership and copyright that we would have to work through, but we do have one pre-approved ADU that was applied for by a designer that's available on our website now. It wasn't like the county paid an architect to design plans for them. Architects can also, if they want, apply to have their plans be made available. So we have one of those, but I definitely have had conversations with the county about how we could potentially set up a system where we apply for each other's programs and do the reviews of each other's plans so that county-wide
Yes.
the plans are available. But at least right now, they are not shareable. But it is something that we have had conversations with the county about.
Okay, awesome.
Temporary use permits. So we have minor and major, but if there's a temporary project or event or something like that, a temporary, we used to do flower sales, if you were selling flowers, there's some new state laws about that, so we don't see them all the time, but temporary use permits come through the planning department. Sign permits. So freestanding signs aside, like the one you saw tonight, any sign attached to a building, a new sign, a change out of a sign, that's going to need a sign permit from the planning department in addition to a building permit after. We process water efficient landscape applications. So we have an ordinance in the city that requires you to build new landscaping projects and pretty major landscaping replacement projects require you to follow water efficient landscape standards. We process these applications ministerially. We review them. Planning also has administrative permit review, which is essentially a staff level, either site and architectural review or a staff level use permit that we can process against our codes and have some staff level ability to approve some minor projects that way. And then I've also put density bonus. Density bonus is a ministerial application. So the approval of a density bonus is ministerial in that there's no discretion. If it meets the density bonus laws, it must be approved. But I put an asterisk because it's not always approved by staff. It gets approved by the body that makes the decision, but the density bonus itself is ministerial. There's not discretion in approving or denying a density bonus. A couple of other ministerial applications I wanted to touch on that are coming from state law, or in the case of the first one, SB 9, we have adopted an ordinance specific to SB 9, so we are in compliance and have our local standard for that. So SB 9 is our Municipal Code Chapter 17.26. This is covering, it's a state law that was implemented a few years ago to cover two different types of developments, what's called 2-unit residential development and urban lot splits. They, in a very, very brief summary, allows essentially up to 4 dwelling units on any lot that's zoned for single family. And it also, inclusive of the 4 dwelling units, allows that single family lot to be subdivided into 2 parcels. So you can subdivide a lot and build 2 and 2, or you can build kind of 4. And it's a combination of ADUs and primary units and those sorts of things. But essentially any single family lot can build up to 4 dwelling units under this ministerial process, meeting these requirements. SB 35 ministerial review is also an important one just for the Planning Commission to be aware of, but you will never see an SB 35 ministerial application because it's ministerial and it must be reviewed by staff. This is a streamlined ministerial approval process for multifamily development. Any development, I believe it's 2 or more units, can apply for this process. It kind of throws on its head that whole completeness process. Ministerial review under SB 35 has a specific process that we have to follow. And it is a 60-day decision timeframe. So when an application is submitted, there is a pre-application requirement and some tribal review, but when the application is submitted, 60 days to make a decision. And the project can only be reviewed against certain objective standards that we have in the city. So if it's, a subjective standard that we couldn't review a project against is if it, fits into the neighborhood, right? But we can review density. We can review, this much needs to be window cover, 50%. We can review a project like this against those objective standards to approve or deny the project ministerially. And the project has to contain a certain amount of affordable units that's outlined in more detail in the state law, but it's usually 10 or 50% at affordability level, and it's based on our current housing production under our RHNA obligations. So it's a little bit complicated, but if the city has met that RHNA category, then the percentage is less or more.
Multifamily, that's what, condos and?
Multifamily is going to be more than one unit on one lot.
Oh,
So it could be condos, but it could also be a duplex, or it could be a fourplex, or it could be an apartment project. It could be, 2 different duplexes, or it could even include a subdivision where they're then building duplexes or something like that. So, but any multifamily development, which means that it's
denser housing, basically, right?
it's not necessarily has to do with density. It generally is denser housing, but it has to do with the form of the housing. So instead of a single family detached house or a townhome, because a townhome is going to be a single family attached house. So it's a single house on a single property. Even if it shares a property line and a wall with another property, that could still be single family, but multifamily is more than one housing unit on a single parcel.
Can they be detached if there's 3?
Yeah, like you might have a little, courtyardy type project where it's one lot. They didn't want to subdivide it, but they wanted to build little courtyardy house. That would still be multifamily.
That's what's considered an over-the-counter permitting process, basically.
Essentially, yeah.
And that's a pretty new law, isn't it?
Relatively new. I would want to say 2-3 years, maybe.
I think that's the one that I confused with SB 9.
Ah.
But yeah, it's I guess supposed to fast track. They get
Yeah.
CEQA exemption, right?
Not CEQA exempt. I could be wrong on that. I'm not going to make a statement on CEQA. I think it might be CEQA exempt.
Yeah.
But yes, this is a law where the state is really trying to push for policy guidance on housing so that processing of housing can be expedited, if that makes sense. So the state really wants you to implement objective design standards, which is a project that we're working on. That the policy, the city council adopts a code that they're comfortable with. And so then you can expedite the processing of and review of applications against those codes because they're easy to decide if it meets it or if it doesn't. It doesn't require a legislative body to say, I feel like this does fit in with the neighborhood or it doesn't fit in with the neighborhood. The state, through all of these laws, even ones that I didn't talk about, all the laws over the last 8-10 years that they build, they hit us with new laws once or twice a year on housing and trying to expedite these processes. And the real focus of all of them is to get away from subjectivity in the review process and expedition of application procedures for housing development. So anything that is ministerial is staff level. We don't really do preliminary reviews for those processes because they're usually a cheaper application and it's kind of just submit to us so we can just get you through the process, right? We'll give you comments. we'll, you know, you don't need a preliminary review. We'll just submit and then we'll work through the process with you. But for larger projects, the city does have two different types of preliminary review. One is our local process, and then the other, just for your information so that the Planning Commission's aware, is a state mandated preliminary application process. That is SB 330. And what SB 330 is it's not really a process. It's just a submittal of 17 items that are listed in the state law. It says if it gives you a site diagram, if it tells you the affordability levels, if they identify the environmental potential impacts, 17 items, then the applicant has submitted a preliminary application under SB 330. And what this does is it grants vested rights. We kind of talked about vested rights, but I didn't say vested rights. When we give an entitlement, that entitlement applicant is vested to the approval that we gave them, right? So even if things change after the fact, they can still build their project that we approved. What SB 330 does is they're vested to all the rules that are in place on the day that they submitted those 17 items. So even if the review process takes time, even if the city changes our general plan, even if the city updates our code, after that SB 330 application was put in place, those new things don't apply to this project. And then the SB 330 preliminary application lasts for 180 days. So they have 180 days from that submittal date to then submit a complete development application to the city. Complete, so it has to go through the incompleteness process and review and all those things. But if they submit in those 6 months a complete application, then all of the environmental review and everything that happens through design review, we're still looking back at that vested date. That's what SB 330 does.
Can
Yeah.
you clarify a little bit? Because it sounds like the same as an entitlement.
It's not approval, but it's again in line with the kind of the state's desire to help facilitate processes and provide kind of clarity to development when they're submitting an application on whether or not, they might get approval. And so what it does is it lets a developer know that, hey, I looked up all the regulations, I read the municipal code, I read the general plan for the day that I submitted this preliminary application. And now I'm going to design all the details of my project to get through the entitlement and get through the CEQA review and environmental review and all those details that take time. It gives them a little bit more time to kind of lock in those codes that they were up to date on. So if the city is doing a zoning amendment, or the city's doing a general plan policy amendment or rezoning or something like that of their property, they can kind of lock in the current policies. Just wanted the Planning Commission to be aware of the state law.
So the vested rights is more specific to any protections against changes in policy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It does lock in certain fees, but it doesn't prohibit like automatic kind of annual increases of fees, but it does if the city was going to adopt a new fee. There's been talks on and off through the years I've been here about like an arts fee. So let's say somebody had a vested right for under SB 330 right now, and then 2 months from now, the council wants to implement an art fee, like for public art on new development. This development wouldn't have to pay that new fee. But they do have to pay any fee. We currently have a sewer impact fee, and that increases annually based on its adopted inflator. They still have to pay the sewer impact fee and as it increases, because that's in place on today.
So it's a timestamp of the requirement that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I want the Planning Commission to be aware of that, because you may find from time to time that we have projects that come before you where we're talking about, they have an SB 330 preliminary right. So if we've made changes, we just talked about code changes and have sent forward some code changes, we can't apply all those. We might not be able to. So if we have these cases, staff is here. Our job is to review these projects in detail, and we come to you with a recommendation. Just like when you make a recommendation to council, staff is coming to you with these projects, making a recommendation to you. So we're going to review these details. That's why we're here. We're experts in our field to present these projects to you. But I think you should be aware of this because it might come up from time to time.
SB 330 is building remedy, correct?
No,
Okay.
No. S 3330 is just this preliminary application that the state says, if you submit these 17 things, you get vested rights for 180 days.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I have a specific. Well, I'll wait. I'll save my questions.
She's almost done.
Almost. Yeah, so that's a state mandated preliminary application thing that is that vested rights. It's not really preliminary review, but the city does offer preliminary review of applications to applicants. And what we do is we will get the application and we'll give it to the DRC like we would with the normal process of a normal project. But the preliminary review, it's a cheaper application fee, and it gets everybody in a room, but also an opportunity to provide written comment from fire, police, engineering, building, planning, when you're just at that preliminary first concept where we can give you feedback on any major concerns. And so a lot of times, we're giving feedback on, this isn't meeting our parking requirements. You're going to need this amount of parking, or it doesn't meet our density. You need to adjust, this is proposing 5 housing units and you need 7 on this lot in order to meet our code. So we can give that initial kind of fundamental feedback about the project so that when the applicant comes with their formal application, they can already address those comments and and then we won't, in theory, have those comments to give. It is important to note, and we note in our written comments that we provide after the meeting, that it's preliminary. It's based on the documents that you provide at the time of the preliminary meeting. We'll take a napkin sketch up to architectural drawings and we'll review what you got and give you as much feedback as we can. And then we'll also talk you through your process, your application process that you're going to need to go through with planning. So if you need site and architectural review, you need a tentative map, we're going to talk you through that at your preliminary meeting to give you that feedback to try and help you through that formal process when you're ready to submit.
And anything produced during that meeting is not enforceable, right? You can reference and say, we told you here that was unacceptable material.
I mean,
Out does the-
it's referenceable, but it's not formal in that it's not comments on an application. It's not subject to that same kind of completeness, like thorough, every single detail that we have to provide you when you submit a formal application. We're trying to give you big feedback. We're trying to give you those fundamental key issues. If engineering sees, hey, this driveway access point is not going to work with how close it is to that intersection, you're going to need to rethink this design. We're trying to give you that big feedback so that you're not going through the completeness and then getting the big feedback of redesigning your plans. You can kind of redesign your plans, then submit a more complete, more code-ready application to get your formal process through.
But
quick.
this preliminary application review, there's a fee for it, right?
There is a fee.
Like $1,500?
Yes.
This is that same process.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I'll have my comments for the end, but okay.
Yeah, and preliminary application review is not mandatory. It's something we offer
That's why
to,
it's not on the flow chart, right?
correct. Yeah, it's not mandatory. It's not required. You can submit a formal application and we're going to take you through the process and we're going to give you design feedback just as we would. It's a thing we offer because a formal application can cost $5,000. You might have 3 different applications at the same time that all cost $5,000. So instead of getting, into a $15,000 application process, formal process, you can get everybody into a room with you and you can talk to the city engineer, you can talk to the fire chief, and you can say, hey, am I going to need sprinklers? Am I going to need to move this driveway around? Do I need parking? What's my process? You can ask them all the kind of first initial questions so that you can draw up your project for when you commit that formal application to the city. You have a little bit more comfort in knowing that you've heard that initial feedback. You're in the fault zone, so you're going to need to do some fault stuff, right? So we'll tell you that stuff initially so that you understand if you want to move forward with your formal application process. The development entitlement applications that are approved by our planning commission. So these are ministerial applications and preliminary review, which happens at the staff level. You're not getting an entitlement from preliminary review, but it's a staff level thing. The applications that come to you as the planning commission are going to be tentative maps, site and architectural reviews, and conditional use permits. So a tentative map is anything that's trying to subdivide property, and the post entitlement process for that is final maps through engineering that we talked about. So if you want to subdivide a property, get a tentative map from the planning commission, and then you go to engineering and you record a final map. That's how you subdivide property. If you want to build a new commercial mixed-use multifamily residential project in the city of Hollister, or if you want to make major modifications to any existing commercial mixed-use or multifamily residential project in the city of Hollister, the entitlement application that you need is site and architectural review. Some other agencies call it design review, architectural review. Here we call it site and architectural review, S&A. That comes before the planning commission. And your post-entitlement process is going to be getting a building permit for that new construction or those modifications. The other thing that the planning commission will see and has the ability to approve or deny is conditional use permits, CUPs. And a conditional use permit is approval of a proposed land use that requires kind of specific review and consideration and conditions of approval, conditional use permit, prior to beginning operations. So while one example that I think is a pretty easy one is like a retail store. If it's a commercial area, you're going to allow a retail store, right? Like that makes sense. You don't need to like specifically review every single retail store that comes in. But if you are doing, maybe it's alcohol, it's a liquor store, your police might want to make special consideration. The planning commission might want to consider, how close it is to other uses around. Maybe there's another liquor store. Maybe we don't want two liquor stores right next to each other, right? So that's something where it's not that you don't want to allow a liquor store in a commercial area, but you want to look at it on a case-by-case basis. So you offer a conditional use permit where you might look at it. We also have conditional use permits for our cannabis uses in the city of Hollister. So those get also reviewed by our council, but cannabis uses, you want to take special consideration before you just approve that use to go in any sort of building or any lot. And so post entitlement, a little bit dependent upon, if there's other proposed changes, like if they need to make structural changes to the building, but you're definitely going to need a certificate of occupancy, which is an application, a building permit application to the building department, but you might not be making improvements to the building, but it is a building permit for getting occupancy. And it's important to note, a lot of the time, people are applying for one or two of these at the same time, and we process them all together. So you're not going to have to get your tentative map first, then get your site and architectural review, then get your CUP. You can apply for your tentative map and your site and architectural review and your CUP. We're going to review it all as one project, pass it to the DRC as one project, bring it to the planning commission as one project. So it's one review process for every application you submit, even if it's technically multiple approvals. Finally, there's the legislative applications. So these are decisions where the city council gets to make the decision, because the planning commission is a quasi judicial body. So you do have the ability to make decisions on those tentative maps, site and architectural reviews, conditional use permits. You do get to decide to approve or deny projects, but you are not policymakers in the city of Hollister. So you make recommendations to the council on policy that has to do with land use. But the council gets to approve any project that has to do with making a policy decision, a policy change. So some of the things that are going to be most of the things that you would see, and then that would go to the council, is plan developments. We kind of talked about those before. That's where you're kind of rezoning and giving a specific code to a specific creative, unique project that might not meet our standards exactly. Zoning ordinance amendments or rezoning. So if we're changing an ordinance, or if a project is proposing, it's currently commercial and they want to build mixed use, or it's currently medium density and want to build high density. If they're rezoning the land use, that goes to the council. Same thing with pre-zoning and annexation of parcels. So the city council gets to decide what land use ultimately it gets to be, if the annexation should move forward to our LAFCO. General plan amendments, so changes of text or changes of land use in the general plan, that's going to come through the planning commission to the council. Specific plans, which are an aspect of general plans, those are legislative. They become policy documents when they're adopted. They go to the council. And then development agreements or any sort of agreement where reimbursement or financial transactions, the planning commission doesn't make agreements with developers. The city council can make agreements.
So the pre-zoning really quick, that's basically the city council making a recommendation, not the, obviously not the planning, but the city AFCO or something for a potential annexation.
Yeah. So super brief on annexation. The city doesn't get to approve annexations. The body is LAFCO, Local Agency Formation Commission. They are a regional body that kind of is outside of the city, outside of the county, outside of San Juan Bautista. They get to decide boundaries. But the city can say, we want to annex this application. That requires the council to decide that they want to annex a parcel. But we must pre-zone the parcel. So we must say, hey, LAFCO, we want to annex this parcel, and if it's annexed, we want it to be general commercial zone. So we study it as a commercial property, and then we, make a recommendation to the council. The council says, yes, we want to pre-zone it. We want to give it the land use designation of general commercial if it's ever annexed into the city, and we want to apply to LAFCO and ask them to annex. So we do the pre-zoning. We give it a potential land use so that when it comes into the city, it has a land use, because you can't have a property that doesn't have a land use designation. So pre-zoning and annexation comes through the planning commission to the council and then off to LAFCO for annexation in the future. But that's a legislative decision to change your land use map, to change your general plan map, to give a parcel a designation of land.
Awesome.
I think that's the end. In conclusion, we have a lot of local, state, federal laws that are shaping our development process here in the city, our regulations. Anything that has to do with creating a new use or modifying the existing use of land or structures in our city should begin with the planning division. So that's the planning staff and the commission and city council. We issue those entitlements, which are like that permission to get a permit in the future from our permitting divisions and our permitting agencies. And then after approval of that entitlement, you have a certain time frame to get all those necessary post-entitlement approvals and permits. And that's how projects come to be. So they're just the examples. And I think that's my end of my presentation. I hope this addresses what the Planning Commission was hoping to hear from about the planning process. I'm happy to answer as many questions as I can. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll start with questions with Commissioner Hernandez and we'll work our way to the right.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, for me, it was more, I really appreciate Eva, the presentation. Honestly, it really did fill the gaps on certain things in my understanding. I mean, ultimately, yeah, my questions are going to be more, or my questions that could turn into recommendations are more in line with like trying to create a process or trying to encourage a process that's a little bit more predictable and ultimately something that's feasible for any applicant, right? Because I do see the gaps, right? And I know you guys, as an example with what mentioned, Commissioner Gonzalez, that, yeah, we want to have a little bit of continuity. Maybe at that point it gets into a recommendation with the city council on code enforcement. So just my quick thoughts that I'd like to get feedback even from the rest of the planning commissioners. Because I'm taking this as trying to create efficiency, even opportunity. I know that part of the general plan, I mentioned it before, is very fixated. And actually, I definitely had a question about the three new elements. One of them had to do with economic development, I believe, right? So those are going to be more, have they already come forward or you guys are still in the discussion phase?
So the 2040 general plan, there was a draft, there was an adopted document, it's been repealed, but the direction from the council that the amendments we're working on don't largely pertain to changing that aspect. So you could review the draft economic development chapter. A lot planning focuses a lot on the land use chapter, the circulation chapter, but the general plan, unlike the zoning code specifically, covers all city activities. So that's where economic development gets into policies that the council in theory wants to adopt and then implement to help promote economic development and all of these other things. They cross not only planning, but they cross the whole cities.
Yeah. Well, and my point of mentioning that is because, I mean, to a certain extent, it's like trying to understand, I think, as the planning commissioners, how to best facilitate that, from a process standpoint, right? Because we're not policymakers, but process on the planning side. For me, I feel like there needs to be a little bit more clarity on the front end. And maybe even like, some of the applicants that are even here had mentioned, that they're kind of getting this back and forth and no one's giving them a solid answer. To a certain extent, I feel like, and I've actually just from the prior app, one of the other public hearings we had in the prior commissioner meeting, where that there was basically these costs that are being absorbed because of these delays, and then reapplying and stuff. So anyways, my point is, I feel like there needs to be a little bit more of I don't know if, and actually maybe it should be a question. Do you guys give information on the front end, like kind of your rights as an applicant, when it comes to a project, or, the review process, the appeal process? Is there any like information handout? I don't know, something.
Yeah, so I mean, that's one thing that I've been working on, and we've been updating all of our forms in the planning department. I know the building department's been more recently working on trying to update their forms to be more user-friendly, and also getting the information that we need to be able to facilitate these permits. But all of those flow charts that we have that I attached, those are up on our website, and I made those about a year ago, trying to really help provide information to the public on processes in the planning department. And so we have those available. We've been working on updating our applications. We're continually kind of updating them and making things better for our applicants and for the community. We're working on updating all of our planning website pages. We have a really good new page on our ADUs. It has a whole web page dedicated to ADUs and the process, not only through planning, but also through building for ADUs specifically, because it's kind of it's a really conjoined process, and we get a lot of people who want to build a granny unit in their yard. They want to convert their garage. So that's a common thing that we see. So we are trying to implement these things, and we've implemented a lot of trying to get the information out on our website, on our forums. We have all the flow charts are on our counter. So if someone comes in, they've got all the flow charts over here. We've got all our applications on the wall. So stuff is here in our house and in our website.
Okay, awesome. Well, and so that's kind of one of my thoughts, is the information, like some kind of like maybe an addendum that kind of informs the applicant on what they, what the process is, what they can expect. I really do believe there should be a little bit more of a, quicker process for them to be able to appeal, especially if there's ambiguity, they're not getting clarity from, and I get it, the planners get really busy. Maybe that's something that should go to the planning commission, even for the sake, as I'm thinking about it, the more, as a small business owner, the more I'm involved, or at least get to have a little bit of a visual of what's happening at inside my shop with staff, and obviously after I've trained them, making sure that these things are happening, that if there's issues, then I'd like to know them on the front end, which basically means the applicant should have an opportunity to come forward and present their case and say, I'm not getting clarity. Maybe there's a better way at that point for us to address it at a process level. So just these are just high level thoughts, but something that maybe gives the appeal process on the front end a quicker process, something that happens within, like a required to respond, because that's one of the issues that I've heard from applicants is it takes forever for them to get a response back. And this is, again, no negative sentiment towards the planning commission or planning department. It's just, to a certain extent, even having this discussion, I think, is going to bring up answers, is maybe there needs to be like a quicker response time, and set an actual expectation as part of the process. You have to respond as the planning department to the applicant within a certain time frame. If there isn't a response, they should have a right to bring forward their appeal, maybe even quicker, and something with clear direction. And I mean, personally, I know when it comes to the preliminary review, I really do believe, and I understand that, city and county governments are tight on funds. I don't think we should be able to charge a fee. And I think you definitely should have a preliminary process, but not charge a fee if there isn't any note taking of the actual direction that the applicant's getting, or a way to reference it from the planning commission side on where the breakdown was and what created the issue. So and then one last thought is maybe an organizational flow chart, something that actually highlights, the departments, the interconnected relationships, right? What is what is basically the interdependence? Because I know that they're independent bodies technically, but something that kind of highlights like where the process happens and who has the authority during that process, right? Whether it's the planner is giving direction, to the applicant, and if the that from there it goes to this department or whatever, right? So you kind of create a little bit of a continuity as far as what they can expect and who to talk to next, or who's going to be able to answer that question. Even it sounds like sometimes is the concern. And again, I really want to be clear. This is no negative sentiment towards the planning department. I really don't know many of the people involved in it. And Ava, I mean, you obviously are very well versed in your job. So, and I really honestly commend you because you gave a really good presentation. But it's again, so the hope is to create continuity, clarity, and ultimately, I think a better expectation, even cost savings, not just from the applicant side, but even with the city side, because I think that'll create a more efficient process overall. Sorry if it was long-winded, but those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Perez?
Same thing, thank you. I would say that, how many applications you say you process per year?
In the planning department, we're
On average.
probably getting about 250 planning applications a year.
So again, we're getting the qualitative feedback from a few applicants, but what this does support is the ability to resolve those matters, right? Because you potentially want to be able to resolve everybody's questions. So even though you're processing mostly without any hiccups or anything, the few that are having issues, those are good opportunities to just address certain bottlenecks within your department. So that's just an observation that I'm making. Again, great overall, 200, that's a lot of volume.
Well, I mean, that's just planning applications, and I would just point out that the issues that are coming up are not coming from planning applications, at least tonight, right? So like the building department's processing thousands of applications a year, engineering department's processing hundreds of applications. So I mean, it is often planning that gets consolidated as the application that they applied for, but we only process the applications I covered, and a lot of applications, a lot of comments are coming from, code enforcement's doing code enforcement things. The city does a lot of things besides just planning. So I think it's important to just understand that when we're coming to planning with some of these questions, it's like we do our best to help and try and guide people to the right place, because we really do kind of spiderweb into all of the departments. But to some extent, a lot of times we're only able to really direct you to the right department because we're not the right department sometimes.
And I put myself in the shoes of a homeowner, right? And I was just navigating the website. And I see you have a section on fences and walls again, but personally, I would still want to go and ask questions just to verify this information. There's a placeholder here. I just want to point out, you might want to close out that comment. Please confirm.
It got migrated in an interesting way, so we are working on
I
trying to
totally
get our
understand.
pages back together.
And again, this is website design. So again, I'm 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps in. Again, I work for the state platform for California Colleges.edu and navigation and making sure we're able to guide users to the right place. Again, I totally understand the challenges when you have so much content. What you described today is very technical. I'm a homeowner doing this project once in my life, hopefully, or twice. I'm not going to remember if I did a fence extension a year ago, if I did an ADU. So I appreciate the steps you're taking already with addressing the language and the overall codes. But again, those are just opportunities to even have staff that may not be well versed with may not have the final answer, just navigating the website. Because again, that's just existing resources that you already have. And the flowchart, again, I love flowcharts. I create them all the time. They're a really good resource, and I would even recommend creating more project specific from beginning to end, all the way to permit. That way somebody can see the full picture. That would be a really strong resource if you don't have it already, but you might have a version of it already. And yeah, and there's opportunity for automation, but before any automation is done with certain permits, types, or anything like that, or entitlements, process has to be established, right? And I think that's kind of what you're finding, where you're dealing with the flow of other teams. It's not just you're responsible for the traffic that you're serving. You're responsible for traffic that's being created elsewhere. So I think that really has to be addressed. I'm not sure what it is. I'll think about it, and if I have an idea, I'll let you know. But again, just thank you for providing this presentation. And yeah, I just feel like you already have existing resources that I think if somebody can help a homeowner navigate, it would be that much closer to hopefully answering some questions. But it's very technical.
Mhm.
That's all.
Commissioner Rodriguez?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to echo kind of just what they were saying. People have reached out, very complicated process, or, and I just also wanted to highlight too, I think I don't know if even, large commercial retailers have seemed to have a problem. Unless I don't know it's planning, because you said it was with building as well. By any chance, I don't know if this is appropriate to ask, but Spirit Halloween, what was the general kind of just overall hold up with that application or something like that? Because I don't know if that's appropriate to ask.
No, I mean, it's not on the agenda, and so I wouldn't recommend talking about a particular project if the project applicant isn't in the room, and especially if it's not on the agenda.
Okay. But just I guess overall, like, I think even some large retailers have had some issues, I think, navigating, and it sounds like, you guys are trying to make a concerted effort to streamline and to get this process, as easy as possible. I guess the only recommendation or thing that I feel like going forward, what I would like to see is the same thing, like something like kind of like another, kind of like maybe maybe it involves a whole different entity that we just recommend and the city just takes ownership of it, where it's like business 101. I know Morgan Hill has something kind of like that, where it's like a one-stop shop where they actually have people in the city helping guide this process, because I went to school for planning too, and it's like it's still overwhelming. So it could very well be it's just we have to just create another entity that specializes in assisting, providing those legal services. So no, that's all I have, and thank you so much for taking the time and answering all of our questions.
So thank you again. It seems like there was a lot of work put into this, and it was very informative and very educational as well. And so I just want to say I appreciate that. Currently, the city doesn't have like for lack of better terms, like a hotline, because like Commissioner Perez had said earlier, I'm looking at this as a standpoint as a resident, right? And if I'm not in construction or I don't build, and for just to be more clear on before I start something, I mean, PG&E has 811 before you dig, right? I mean, there should be like, or I mean, a recommendation, there should be something that residents can just reach out to and then just get the standard process. So I guess it would be call planning, and then planning directs you. But then that could get overwhelming for planning, right? Just taking calls constantly.
To that point, I mean, that is our job, and that's why we're here. If you call us, we're going to give you an answer. If you email us, we're going to give you an answer. My team is very thorough, and we're not always the first person you've contacted, but we always try to give you as much information as we can about our process, about when you reach us at planning, when you reach us at the permit counter. We're going to do what we can. We're going to try and find your old permit. We're going to try and get in contact with code enforcement for you to, if we don't have your code enforcement violation and they haven't given it to you, to give us a copy. We're going to take your information. We're going to try and be that mediation point. We're trying to improve our process and trying to improve the information that we have available for planning and for building and for community development. But while we might not be the first person that you get in contact with, when you come to us, we're trying to be, and I think we are successful in being a point of contact. And I think a little bit of that comes from, as planners, we are that spider web. We are the middle cog of the spider web wheel that is all of these different departments who are very technical and siloed in their kind of fire codes, and I'm in my engineering codes, and I'm the environmental health department, and we're in the normal process, we are the person that takes that technical, takes this technical, and we consolidate that into a comment letter, right? That's our job just in entitlement review, in application review. And so we do exercise that in trying to facilitate, you come to us with a code enforcement, and we're going to try and reach out to code enforcement and get your violation notice so we can look at what it is that they saw out there, what it is that they're trying to tell you to do. Do you need a building permit? Do you need a planning permit? So while I can't say we are the first person everyone contacts, I will say we are the first person you should contact, and we're going to do what we can because we are that cog, and we also are that kind of foundation that kind of sees it all, umbrellas it all into our plan thing that then branches out into the specifics, so we can try to facilitate that as best we can.
And maybe just a recommendation, maybe that should be broadcasted out to the residents. I don't know if that would be a mailer or on the web, email blasts or whatever it may be. Just the more the residents know, I think the better, basically. And then I know this varies from project to project, but I mean, from start to finish, with application fees and everything, what's the standard that it costs to go through with a project, just on the fees and applications? And
It's incredibly dependent on the project.
right, so
Yeah.
there's no range. I mean, if it was just an expedited project, build it from the ground up from start to finish,
It would range totally dependent upon what it is the proposal is from the ground up, or even a remodel. It just totally depends on where it is, the specifics. You might have certain environmental conditions at one area that the exact same project at a different spot might not have. It is very, very project specific.
And who's the authority on setting the fees? That would be the council?
The city council.
Okay. And then maybe for a recommendation, because Commissioner Hernandez had brought this up during one of his questions, but it kind of struck me that we have a standard fee for these appeals, but this could be, would the fee be the same for somebody that's building a brand new grocery store versus somebody that's doing something to their home?
As the council has adopted the current fees, yes.
Could it be possible for us to make a recommendation to the council that we base it on a project by project basis?
Like a tiered structure.
Yeah, because I mean, for a resident, $3,000 sets people back quite a bit, to a corporate entity, that's just a drop in the bucket, but, there should be some kind of tiered structure based on the size of the project. I feel, I don't know how the other commissioners feel, but,
I was thinking the same thing personally.
Well, and it is important to know that the way fees are generally established is also set by state law. So fees are generally charged to cover the cost of staff time. And so the city council could adopt a lower fee, like make an exception to that. But generally, to process an appeal, and Eva could correct me if I'm wrong, but to process an appeal for a big project versus a small project is likely not that much less work for staff.
That's correct. Yeah. And I would say, I mean, I don't know, and maybe Jennifer knows better on like a recommendation on fees from Planning Commission, just because I don't know where your purview lies in that. But I will say that though I can't tell you the status of a fee study, supposedly the city is kind of working on a fee study. And that's something that planning is looking at. A lot of agencies will have, it's not necessarily based on size, but they'll have a fee for appeals where if it's the applicant appealing, they pay the full price. And if it is if it's someone aggrieved by the project that isn't the applicant, so for example, maybe a project gets approved and a neighbor wants to appeal it who isn't the applicant, a lot of times the city will either subsidize that application or they'll charge the applicant the difference. So it's still the full amount because, as Jennifer mentioned, the fee covers staff time. But it doesn't eliminate someone who is trying to be a part of the process and exercise their right to appeal a project, even if it isn't their project that they didn't like the decision on. A lot of cities will kind of make the applicant pay for the difference and subsidize the fee in some way. So, but appeals is a fee that if the city is moving forward in a fee study, I've already prepared a lot of backup documentation over the years to try to implement and update our planning fees. Just has to get implemented to a larger fee study. But that is a fee that we would look at.
Perfect. And then just another recommendation, I don't know if it's in our purview, but a set time for the appeals, if somebody puts in an appeal, it should be heard within a timely manner. But you said currently it's about 60 days, 2 months, 2 meetings.
Yeah, so currently it's about 2 meetings because our newspaper noticing requirements are pretty long. So currently the newspaper that we have to notice in is the Freelance. It's the only newspaper that meets the requirements. And it only publishes on Friday, and you have to submit to the paper a week before the publication date. So for example, this notification tonight went out 3 weeks ago to the newspaper. So we knew what was on the agenda 3 weeks ago in order to meet state mandated publication deadlines. So usually it's the timing of when that application is filed, whether or not it could make the next commission meeting or not because of notification deadlines. Otherwise, the only reason that it's been extended beyond that most immediate next meeting is at the request of the appellant. So we do send it to the most immediate next meeting. It just might seem like it takes a long time because we have 1 planning commission meeting a month and a pretty heavy lead time on notification requirements.
I think if we had just had a standard set time limit, whatever it is, and it's documented, and then, obviously documented that the appellate has request extensions and how many extensions and time limits on those as well, just for, I guess documentation purposes. But those are the recommendations. And again, thank you. It was a very detailed report, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
One other question, Chair. So, because you mentioned the cost recovery about the fee structure, I still think and I want to make sure that before we end the meeting, that if these are recommendations, that we could actually put it on the agenda to discuss so that we can get feedback from staff for the, the following agenda. But technically speaking, and I understand cost recovery, but ultimately, if you think about the reality, right, and that's maybe that could be part of the conversation, we can add into it some kind of a report on ultimately all the code violations that exist in the county, right? Because if you think about it, if you create a very stiff barrier to entry to a certain extent to someone who wants to be legitimate in addressing a permitting process, but because of the cost, it becomes such a heavy burden that they'd rather take the chance. At what point in time does it not become even harder to keep up with potential violations and then liability because of those violations, God forbid, a fire, whatever, and then before you know it, there could have been a lot of prevention from the front end and to a certain extent, lowering the bar and making it easier for the people to address the bringing forward their grievance, whatever it is, to address some kind of a code violation, a permitted structure that should have been, or a non-permitted structure that should have been permitted. So that way they can rectify the situation and then avoid the cost downstream and even potentially, God forbid, the public safety hazards and liability. I think that's just really important to consider and bring that forward as part of the next agenda conversation.
I would also like to add and explore, we've had a lot of development, right? And how does the staffing size compare to other cities, similar sizes? Because it just may be an output problem. You don't have enough
I was thinking
staff
the same thing.
because the volume you mentioned, that's a lot. And I think you are using up your timelines up to the days. I haven't heard projects ending extra early or anything like that. Maybe it's not the project type. But I would like to explore how does the city's staffing ratio to the population, how does that compare to other cities? And that might just be another bottleneck.
Yeah, and that I've heard quite a few things that are really outside of the Planning Commission's purview. And so I think, and staff can tell me if they like this plan, but I think we can go through the minutes or the video of the meeting and determine which of these recommendations are within the planning commission purview and which are not. And then, you know, potentially bring back those that are and explain to the planning commission why those others are not. And then any items that are outside of your actual purview as a planning commission, you're certainly welcome as citizens to bring those things directly to the plan or to the city council, either to the city council member that appointed you or at public comment. So just because they're outside of your purview as planning commissioners doesn't mean that you can't raise those issues directly with the city council as a citizen.
And by raise issues, you mean raise a question?
Yeah, or like, for example, the size of the staffing in the planning commission, or I'm sorry, in the planning department is outside of the purview of the planning commission. And so, but staffing is within the purview of the city council. So it wouldn't be something we would bring back to the planning commission to discuss, but rather the city council could determine whether or not they think that the planning department needs to have more employees. And they may want to, if they don't hear it from you, I don't know where they would hear that from.
Well, I mean, my only rebuttal, city attorney, is if we don't understand these things, then even from what I'm hearing with the consensus is all we're going to end up doing is putting more burden on Eva and the department without any consideration of what's necessary to actually address that bottleneck. So to a certain extent, at least even informationally understand what is the organizational structure, what is the level of staffing, right? And then at that point, yes, we can maybe outside of an agendized meeting, but we can, or somehow come up with some informational to present to the council, not for us to direct their policy, but at that point, at least inform them of what we're talking about on why these considerations are necessary to address the bottlenecks in our process specifically.
Yeah, I don't follow that argument. Your purview is outlined within your bylaws. And so if you want to know exactly what items or issues you are tasked with, those are in the bylaws. And
Yeah, I
anything
know.
outside of that.
I've read the bylaws.
Mhm.
I read all of them, and we can give recommendations, doesn't mean they'll take it. And to a certain extent, if we want to address something, we have to be fully informed in order to address it. And that's what we're asking. We're literally asking, we want to be informed. If we're not informed, how do we know? Otherwise, fine, we won't talk about that. We'll still get, I personally will still get that information, but then all we're being told basically from what I'm hearing is we're going to put more burden on Eva and the planning department, regardless of our understanding of the city staffing levels and what's necessary to address it.
Yeah, I don't understand the burden on the planning department because the planning commission also doesn't have the authority to direct planning staff. And so you cannot direct staff to do anything other than what's within the bylaws.
Well, we can direct staff on our process, on the process of planning in order to effectuate what we're doing when it comes to planning.
The planning process is not within your purview. So
You're right, but we can give direction to the city council. We can advise the city council, I'm sorry.
right, as individuals. So I just want to make sure we're clear on what, I just don't want you to have an expectation that there will be things coming back to the planning commission that you've mentioned from the dais tonight that are not within your purview.
Yeah, I appreciate that clarification. I think I understand. This presentation was informational only. It's not meant to make adjustments per our recommendation. But again, it's just the way my analytical mind works. I'm trying to get to the source of the issue of all this. And again, this is impacting homeowners and the staff as well. And I'm just trying to find a solution, but I think it's through the route that you mentioned, going straight to my city council member and just kind of saying, we received the presentation and these are our questions that you may want to ask. So
Yeah, and you can certainly ask, you're certainly welcome to ask staff questions outside of the meeting as well. So if you want to talk to Eva or any other planning staff, if you have questions, I'm sure they'd be happy to answer those.
Sounds good.
Yeah, me personally, I'm definitely going to be speaking to my city council member and informing them of this discussion, because I think none of this matters if we're not able to basically speak directly to the issue. So whatever the process is fine. But at the end of the day, like, we need to solve this and it's not gonna happen. Based off of what I'm hearing, it's not gonna happen you know, we want to address the process, which the city council has the right to amend that process.
All right, is there any further questions from the commission? Hearing none. Staff, do we have any public comments on this item?
Hi, yes, we have Ann Hall who would like to speak.
And if anybody would like to make public comments, there's the speaker cards.
They already have your first one.
Good evening, Planning Commission. My name is Ann Hall with Sampanito Engineering. I'm a civil engineer here locally. I'm often here before you representing clients on projects. I came to this meeting because the process was being discussed, and I have been here a variety of times with a variety of clients. It's not always a smooth process. I think there's room for improvement. Individual people within the city, like Evo or Brendan, this is not a criticism of them specifically, but there is a level of frustration with the process, I think. And there's some things I'd like to go over that I probably won't get done in 2 minutes. But a lot of times when people think about applicants, they're thinking in terms of big developers, big 200 lot subdivisions. A lot of the applicants I represent are not big developers. They're people who are trying to do one business. So something like having to go get a use permit, and it takes 6 months to even get through the process of entitlement, as Eva explained, before you can get to the process of building, it is a financial burden on people. On people who don't have big money. I have multiple examples. The planning approval, in my opinion, is a conceptual approval. And in some of the documentation that Eva showed tonight, it's described as a conceptual approval. But I can tell you the things that get asked for are design level pieces of information. And I don't think that's appropriate at the planning level. One thing that got talked about was the pre-application meeting. This is a great idea to have a pre-application meeting. And I was pretty excited when it first came up. But there is a cost to it. And after 3 different meetings with 3 different clients, that meeting proved to be not useful, unfortunately. Either no information was given, bad information was given, and it was at the beginning of the time, this process, so maybe it wasn't well worked out, but the result is I don't recommend people to do the pre-application meeting anymore because it's money that just seemed not well spent. You may as well just spend the money to go for the site and architectural and get real comments back. And again, things can vary. I'm just talking about my experience. Again, I have a lot of comments. I know we're limited to 3 minutes, but one of the things is conditions of approval for projects are not provided to the client until they're published for the public noticing. There are some things that I think could be worked out with staff ahead of coming to the meeting. If we had the conditions of approval 3 or 4 days ahead, which used to be more normal. So I would just like to potentially reach out to you.
Yeah, so if we have consensus, can we give the speaker another 2 minutes?
Sure.
Thank you. We used to be able to get the conditions of approval a few days before they were published. And then we could at least say, hey, did you really mean this? Or can we clarify this? The one I came to, I think it was June, had, 5 or 6 conditions repeated. And it had to be something, it was just a typo. It had to be discussed here. I had to spend some of my 3 minutes saying there's a typo in these conditions to get it changed at the Planning Commission, which was a waste of everybody's time. That would be helpful. Let's see, just on the checklist that was provided tonight, for example, on the all sheets, it talks about you need to provide a 3.5 by 2 inch tall box for city use. That's fine. But then you go to page 7 and it says you have to provide a 3 by 3 block for revisions and dates. I mean, small things, but these are a part of the same application. And I have differing direction on what I'm supposed to be putting for something very simple. Photometric plan is a part of this planning application. Photometrics, or the requirements to light a site, are something the city has every right to ask for. When I go through site and architectural, that's just a condition I have to comply with. If I provide you a site and architectural, which usually means hiring an electrical engineer at a stage where they don't normally have an electrical engineer involved, it's an extra expense to the client. When the approval, once I get approved, my project still has to meet photometrics. I mean, there's no discussion to be had there. So I don't know that it serves a purpose. And just to wrap it up here, shoot, one of these. When it's required to be so detailed at the planning stage, it reduces the ability of the applicant and the planning commission to make adjustments. If they've already paid me for a fully detailed design, they don't want to come here and listen to what you have to say, because then they're just gonna be paying me again. But again, I know I have a time limit. I'd appreciate maybe the opportunity to talk later with you. Not all these are bad comments, but it's not a smooth process. So
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are informative.
Yes, our next speaker is Sandra and Ruben Lopez. My understanding is since the previous speaker received 5 minutes, they will also have 5 minutes.
That's correct.
Thank you. I just had a couple questions. As you guys see, well, I was sitting here and I learned a lot through your process. Well, it did strike me when you said, oh, you can build a fence, but you don't need a permit. So I was just sitting here like, why did I have to go to the engineering department to get a permit that was within guidelines and I paid for it? So I just didn't understand that. Like, you don't need a permit. They told me I needed a permit, so I went and got a permit. Just being told one thing, you're telling me we're supposed to come to you for things. And I think that's why they're like, oh, well, we can't send everyone to you. And you're right. You're not the only one that gets applications. I've been sent to the engineering department. Then they'll refer me to the planning department. Then they'll refer me to a different department. And that's the little runaround we're getting, which just is frustrating. Like I told my husband, okay, we try to follow the processes. I'll have to look up and I have to read my paperwork to find, okay, what's next? What do I do? Because I'm not getting that from you guys. So I have to figure it out. So we're trying. Hey, apply, send an email to the engineering department. Hi, I'd like to do this. How do I go about it? Okay. They don't answer. So I look it up, pull up the application. Okay, let's apply for a permit, which you're saying I didn't even need to begin with. Get denied. Wait another year, try to apply again. Get a runaround. Where, it's just very, very frustrating. And so now our dilemma as homeowners and just trying to extend our fence within the PUE, which was just approved June for my neighbor. He pushed his out. It's in a PUE. Got approved. There was no safety issues, no anything. But for me, because it's pushed out, like you said, that's code. So I get that. I have to deal with code enforcement on that. But my question is, okay, so where do I go? If you can direct me, like speaking to planning now, the PUE. So now what do I do? They're saying I have one permit to extend it forward, which I didn't even have to pay for. I could have did that by myself, but I don't want to do that. My thing is I wanted to extend it, like I had said the very first time I reached out to engineering. So what do I do? What can I do? Who do I go to? Like, these are my questions. Who can direct me or who can help answer them?
We can't answer that question right now.
No, I'm asking the planning department. She asked me, like, where do I go? Is that in engineering? Because then they send me to you, or I don't know where to go. So that's part of the frustration you're getting from like homeowners who are trying to do things right. We're trying to go. If you told me, hey, you can do that here, $2,000, we would have done that. But I got 20 different answers. No, you can't. Well, you can't right now because we're getting applications. Oh, but you can do this, but you can't do this. It's just, that's what's very frustrating. We're just trying to do things right. And there's no way to know how. And
Can we
in
set
the,
up an appointment with you? That way we can go through the flow chart and then start.
what
process?
flow chart though, because
But
no.
you showed.
Okay, yeah, so my neighbor came and did the appeal, and I'm getting it now with that. Oh, he did the public notice, he did this, that's how he came before the planning commission. With his case, we were told you couldn't do that. You had to go to the planning commission, submit a permit, get denied, then you can appeal it, so. We don't know what to do or where to go from here, but in the meantime, we're getting fined every day for our code enforcement, so. I don't know. I need somebody to tell me what to do, where to go.
I believe you gave her your contact info?
So contact you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We do not have any more comments.
I would still like to make a recommendation, see if I can get support from the commission on bringing forward these recommendations, regardless of whether it's within our jurisdiction, because I'm just asking for informational. I'm not asking for us to make a policy decision. It's information. Because I do want it agendized and I do want it to be in public record. So I don't know if I can get support from any other board member to bring that information forward. Again, this is specific to information, just like today, but not, so no policy direction, but at least be able to get, I'd like to know what is the organizational structure? What is the flow chart of the staff? Who does what? And what do they do?
I believe the city attorney said that she would draft up the questions that we could get answers to, or I mean, you would answer all the questions, but you would let us know if we had purview over the questions that were asked tonight or recommendations.
That's right. I'd like to get staff's buy-in to that plan, but I think the best thing to do would be to listen to your comments and list them and then determine which of them are within your purview to come back to a meeting and which are not, but inform you which are not so that you know why they aren't coming back.
Okay, so thank you for that clarity. So from what I'm hearing is we would still get that information, but you would basically give us direction or guidance on what is technically considered our jurisdiction and what isn't.
Right.
Okay, so as long as it's all included, that's what I care about. And then I still think we should have, some of these questions which are within our jurisdiction, the more detailed information. I'd like to know what our staffing levels are. Maybe it's what my fellow councilman Damian mentioned, yeah, maybe it's a bottleneck of staff and we don't know that.
I would just say that your team is a limited resource. There's a lot of questions that are very unique, very specific, and that is a challenge in any service, so I think it's worth at least drafting the questions. Any of you come back saying out of your purview, that's perfectly fine. Yeah.
No, I think that's it. That's all I have.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
I
Thank
think
you.
we're ready to.
We'll move on to item number 8.1. Any reports from the commission? I'll start with you, Commissioner Hernandez.
Outside of my recommendations, just thank you everybody for being patient with me. I'm still learning, but I'm obviously passionate. I want to see some good stuff happen through this commission. We volunteer our time, which, by default, that means I'm hoping, I would imagine most of us would want to see some serious results for the benefit of our community.
Commissioner Perez?
I don't know if this item is even something we could inquire about, but the Kmart building, can we get a status of, is that something that we could even inquire about? What is the long-term plan for it? What is the holdup for a new business going in? If that's not available to be public knowledge, then that would be a good answer.
I don't really know. I don't know that we could talk about it specifically regardless because there's no project, but it's
Probably not, it's very specific.
and I would just say generally the city does not bring projects, applicants bring projects. So if that helps to kind of answer the question in a general way, projects come to us and we
It's
review.
it's
That's
out of your
our
control, you
purview.
cannot initiate it. Okay.
Commissioner Rodriguez.
No, I don't really have anything at this time. I think overall, I'm just trying to understand the whole process. And there seems to just be, I think on my own time, I'm probably going to be asking questions. So.
All right, we'll move on to item 8.2, Planning Division reports. Staff, do we have any reports?
I thought I had something that I needed to tell you, but I can't recall. So I don't have any reports.
It's been a long night, so I guess I don't have to get a motion. So this meeting is now adjourned at I can't see 9:09 p.m. Thank you, everybody.